Most stories follow the adventurers. They're the ones on the front lines, fighting monsters and soaking up all the glory. But do you ever think about the people who actually put the weapons in their hands? Their work is the foundation of every adventure, yet they're never the ones written into the fairy tales. That's why the star of this story isn't the person swinging the sword. It's the one standing at the forge. A hidden hero, often overshadowed by the legends they help create. This is the story of a blacksmith, someone whose very soul has been tempered by iron and fire. 10 years ago, the legendary blacksmith village of Vulcania was burning. The 8th Corps commander watched as his forces laid waste to the town. He wasn't in any rush. Things were going exactly as planned. A massive battering ram smashed against the castle gates. The defenses were at their limit, and the end was coming fast. Inside the shelter, the walls rumbled with every impact. Dust shook from the ceiling as the heavy sound of destruction echoed through the room. The survivors huddled together, wounded and exhausted. They weren't soldiers, just craftsmen waiting for a rescue that wasn't going to come. A man placed his hand against the wooden door. The news from the Empire finally arrived, but it wasn't what they hoped for. The officials had already fled, leaving the village to fend for itself. They were officially on their own. It wasn't a surprise to most of them. The country had turned its back on Vulcania a long time ago. Then came the demon army's offer. If they agreed to forge weapons for the enemy, they'd be allowed to live. If not, everyone died. The blacksmith scoffed at the idea. There was no way he was going to serve the monsters that destroyed his home. The mood in the room shifted. Everyone there had already made peace with the fact that they weren't getting out alive. A tiny hand gripped a man's shirt, tight and trembling. Young Garantia Yuta looked up at her father, her eyes filled with fear. Yuta's father placed a hand on her head and told her to stay hidden right there. He explained that their village's forging techniques were more than just a job. They were their heart and soul. Those secrets could never be lost. He told her she had to be the one to survive. It was the only way they could face what was coming without any regrets. He reminded her that in a world full of monsters, they were the ones who created humanity's claws. They had every reason to be proud. He gave her one final command: survive no matter how painful things became. Yuta watched from behind the stone wall as her father and the other men prepared to walk out. She was left alone with the weight of the village's future. The castle gates finally splintered and groaned under the weight of the demon assault. Yuta's father stood ready with his hammer. He wasn't going to surrender without a fight. The 8th Corps commander faced him, looking totally unimpressed. He figured the blacksmiths had finally chosen a suicide mission over slavery. He didn't care either way. He ordered his legion to slaughter anyone who refused to bow down. Demon spears glinted in the dim light, ready to pierce through anyone in their path. The blacksmiths didn't hesitate. They charged forward, weapons raised, directly into the enemy lines. Yuta's father led the pack, his face set in a grim snarl as he faced the incoming spears. They were craftsmen who dared to master iron with nothing but their own 2 hands. The clash was brutal. Blacksmiths fought alongside their tools, desperate to hold back the tide of demons. From her hiding spot, young Yuta screamed out for her father, tears streaming down her face. A hulking demon raised a massive blade, ready to cut down the resisting humans. Yuta's father swung his hammer with everything he had left. He roared a final reminder to his daughter. Blood sprayed across the white background. The pride of Vulcania was being extinguished in a single moment. Yuta stared out, her face pale as she witnessed the massacre of her people. The battlefield fell silent, littered with the bodies of those who refused to bend. It was a bitter contrast to how things used to be. Not long ago, the village was full of life and laughter. Now those same people lay still in the dirt, their tools abandoned beside them. A heavy boot landed right in front of the young girl. Her hiding spot was no longer safe. Young Garantia Yuta stared out from her hiding spot, her eyes wide with shock. The world she knew was gone in an instant. Blood soaked the ground where her people once lived and worked. Every hope of a peaceful life had been cut short by the invasion. A shadow loomed over her as a cold, mocking voice laughed. The enemy knew that one survivor remained among the ruins. The 8th Corps commander stood over the terrified girl. He gloated that every protector she ever had was now lying dead in the dirt. Without a shred of mercy, he reached down and gripped her head. His massive fingers clamped around her skull like a vice. He hoisted her into the air like she was nothing more than a piece of scrap metal. She thrashed and kicked, but she was completely powerless against his brute strength. A sharp pain cut through her as he branded her face. In his eyes, she wasn't a child. She was just a useful piece of property. He told her to be grateful for her life. To him, surviving was a gift, even if it meant a lifetime of chains and labor. He declared that as a craftsman of Vulcania, she would spend the rest of her days forging weapons for the Demon King's army. Behind them, the once great village of blacksmiths was nothing but smoke and corpses. Her life as a free person ended right there in the ashes. 10 years later, the scene shifts to the Hojal slave smithy. The air is thick with the smell of sulfur and the constant roar of the furnace. The sounds of the forge never stop. The quench, the grind, and the rhythmic strike of the hammer. It's a factory of death powered by nothing but slave labor. Garantia Yuta is now a young woman, her face hardened by a decade of grueling work. She wipes the sweat from her brow, her eyes dull under the oppressive heat. For 10 years, this workshop has been her entire world. The slaughter of her village is a memory she carries in every scar. Surviving the end of her world was only the beginning of a long nightmare. Now, she lives as a blacksmith slave, forced to forge weapons for the remnants of the Demon King's army. She pulled off her goggles, her breath heavy. Another long, exhausting day was finally coming to a close. She tossed her gear onto the workbench, the sound echoing in the hollow room. At this point, she felt less like a person and more like just another tool. Looking into the fire, she wondered if she could even call herself a blacksmith anymore. She wasn't creating art, she was just manufacturing tools for destruction. A familiar, booming voice interrupted her dark thoughts. The 8th Corps commander walked in, his presence immediately making the cramped room feel even smaller. He loomed over her, his massive frame a constant reminder of who owned her life. Yuta turned to face him, her expression blank and resigned. He dumped the remains of one of his subjects onto the floor, a demon named Fix who had fallen in battle against the hero. Yuta looked down at the corpse without flinching. She had seen too many of these to be bothered by the sight of death anymore. To the commander, his own subordinates were just raw materials once they stopped being useful in a fight. He ordered her to dismantle the body and repurpose it into a new weapon. It was a gruesome task, but one she was forced to perform every single day. She didn't argue or resist. She just gave a hollow confirmation, her spirit too tired to do anything else. She knelt over the monster's remains and began the grim work of tearing it apart. Her hands moved with a mechanical precision born of years of forced practice. Blue blood splattered as she cut into the cold flesh. In this hellhole, she was a butcher just as much as she was a smith. She used the secret techniques of her people to process the demon's body, turning the essence of her enemies into tools for their war. Blood sprayed across her face, but she didn't even blink. She felt miserable, trapped in a cycle of survival that often felt worse than death. Every single day, she asked herself if it was actually worth it. Maybe she should have just died alongside her father 10 years ago. Suddenly, the ceiling above her started to crack and groan. Debris rained down as something massive began to break through the roof. She stared up, momentarily distracted from her dark thoughts. She wondered what a true blacksmith would even do in a moment like this. With a deafening crash, the roof caved in completely. A blinding light poured into the dark smithy as the intruder landed right in the center of the room. Out of the settling dust emerged a blonde girl with a wide, confident grin. She didn't look like she belonged in a place this grim. The intruder sat casually on the pile of rubble, looking around the workshop with genuine curiosity. She seemed surprised to see another human deep in demon territory. Yuta stood frozen, her eyes wide as she tried to process what just happened. She couldn't believe someone had actually broken into the smithy. She managed to choke out a question, asking the mysterious girl who she was and where she came from. The blonde girl tapped her chin, thinking it over for a second as if the answer wasn't totally obvious. Then she introduced herself with total confidence. She was the new generation hero, and she was clearly there for a reason. Meanwhile, back in the Demon King's fortress, other commanders were starting to complain about the 8th Corps. They didn't like the idea of a human handling their fallen comrades. The 8th Corps commander just laughed them off. He knew that the forging technique Yuta possessed was a rare bloodline that couldn't be replicated by anyone else. He explained that unlike ordinary iron, the remains of powerful monsters were incredibly volatile. One wrong strike, and everything would go up in flames. Without her unique skills, the Demon King's army would lose its greatest source of powerful weapons. She was far too valuable to get rid of now. The commander spoke of her unique ability to perceive the risks hidden within monstrous materials. For him, Yuta's blacksmith village was a goldmine for the invaders, representing a rare opportunity to mass-produce elite weaponry for the Demon King's army. That opportunity vanished when the smiths, including Yuta's father, chose a suicidal final stand over a life of forced labor. With the legendary ironworkers dead, the demon commanders are left fuming over their lost prize. Back in the present, Garantia Yuta sat on the cold floor of the smithy, her red hair tied back. She was the sole bearer of a precious bloodline, a fact the commander never let her forget. The commander growled at his subordinates, his deep voice declaring that the girl would continue to work on whatever corpses were brought to her. She was a vital cog in the Demon King's war machine. Garantia Yuta's eyes widened in genuine disbelief as she looked at the newcomer. The word hero felt alien in a place defined by chains and despair. The blonde girl, known as the new generation hero, simply smiled and adjusted her gear. She took the title in stride, acknowledging it as a name others had given her. Yuta's gaze dropped to the weapons strapped to the girl's waist. Something about the craftsmanship caught her eye, triggering a deep-seated instinct. Without thinking, Yuta lunged forward and grabbed one of the hilts, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and frantic curiosity. She had to know what kind of rare materials could create such a blade. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, her eyes darting across every minute detail of the forging. The rigidity and the specific casting method were unmistakable. It was a technique she knew by heart. The new generation hero looked slightly taken aback by the blacksmith's sudden intensity. She casually mentioned that the swords were from a place called Artisan Street, though she considered them just common iron spring blades. Yuta wasn't listening to the hero's modest description. She was too busy tasting the metal. She confirmed with a wide-eyed stare that the quality was top-tier, unlike anything she had seen in years. The hero watched with a mixture of amusement and concern as the girl continued to obsess over the iron. To her, Yuta's behavior was more than just a little strange. Holding the blade aloft, Yuta's expression softened into a wistful gaze. She spoke of her childhood capture and a life spent working exclusively with the volatile remains of monsters. She explained how she had to teach herself the forbidden arts using only the fragmented literature left behind by her slaughtered kin. It was a matter of survival, forge or die. The name Artisan Street echoed in her mind like a forgotten prayer, a place where real blacksmiths could practice their craft without the weight of slave collars. The new generation hero's smile turned determined as she made a bold promise. She intended to liberate Yuta and take her to that legendary haven for smiths. The offer was so unexpected that Yuta could only manage a single, whispered word of shock. The idea of leaving this hell was almost too much to process. She stared at the hero's back, the silhouette of the blonde girl a stark contrast to the darkness of the smithy. The hero continued, her voice soft but firm. She saw past the surface, knowing that Yuta's dedication to her work wasn't just a result of a desire to stay alive. A memory of a warm hand resting on her young head surfaced, a mentor's touch from a lifetime ago. The words of her master about surviving through hell began to resonate. Yuta sat in the shadows, reflecting on the idea that those who endure such suffering are either holding onto a reason to live or are desperately searching for one. The new generation hero looked back at her, posing the question directly. She wanted to know if Yuta had finally found her own reason to keep going. A vision of the village's final moments flashed before her, the smiths walking into the light, their hammers still held high. Carry on the craft! The command from her past rang through her mind, a legacy of fire and iron that she had been carrying alone for 10 long years. The hero sat calmly, acknowledging that Yuta didn't need to provide an answer right away. Some truths took time to settle. The heavy thud of approaching footsteps shattered the moment. Yuta looked up, the familiar dread of her captor's presence returning in an instant. The new generation hero didn't even flinch, simply nodding the noisy arrival of an uninvited guest. The 8th Corps commander stepped through the threshold, his massive, muscled frame filling the doorway. He demanded to know what was causing the disturbance in his slave's workspace. His eyes narrowed as they landed on the blonde girl. The realization of who she was sent a surge of adrenaline through his monstrous body. He loomed over them, his voice a booming roar that echoed through the stone chamber. He couldn't fathom how the infamous hero had managed to penetrate so deep into their territory. The new generation hero didn't seem bothered by the intimidation, casually telling Yuta that their conversation would have to continue later. With a sharp ring of metal, she drew her blades, the sound cutting through the thick atmosphere of the forge. She stood ready, a sword in each hand, her stance perfectly balanced despite the massive opponent before her. With a fierce battle cry, she charged forward, her eyes locked onto the commander. The clash was instantaneous and violent. The hero's speed was a blur as she met the commander's raw power head-on. Sparks flew as her twin blades struck against the commander's hard skin and armor, the sound of the impact rattling the nearby tools. She taunted him as she fought, her grin wide and full of confidence. She reminded him of the last time she had decimated his forces. The 8th Corps commander's face twisted in a mask of pure rage. He blamed the hero for his current assignment, seeing his role as a slave driver in a backwater smithy as an insult to his status. He lashed out with his massive, whip-like tail, the thick appendage cracking against the stone floor as he tried to pin her down. The battle intensified, the smithy becoming a chaotic arena of steel and shadow. Each strike from the new generation hero was a testament to the quality of the blades Yuta had just admired. The new generation hero narrowed her eyes at the 8th Corps commander's tail, noting the addition of a deadly circular saw blade. She wondered if this was a recent enhancement to his monstrous form. Her boots slammed into the stone floor, grounding her for the next exchange as the air around them crackled with tension. With a defiant grin, the hero brandished her twin swords. She wasn't intimidated by his new tricks, confident that his attacks meant nothing if they couldn't land a single blow. She launched herself into the air, her movements as fluid as if she were flying. Below them, Yuta watched the high-speed clash, the sheer power of the combatants dwarfing the small smithy. Yuta's golden eyes were fixed on the spectacle, a look of profound realization crossing her face as she witnessed the hero's freedom. She looked down at the heavy metal collar around her own neck, the glowing links of the chain, a constant reminder of her status. The contrast between her captivity and the hero's unrestrained spirit was stark. The hero spun through the air, her blades carving trails of white light that hissed through the smoke-filled room. The 8th Corps commander grunted in frustration as his saw-blade tail failed to catch his nimble opponent. He had clearly underestimated the agility of the new generation he was facing. Tightening her grip on the leather-wrapped hilts, the hero prepared to escalate the fight. She swung with blinding speed, her blades meeting the commander's reinforced forearms with a series of heavy, ringing impacts. The commander's face contorted with effort, his teeth bared as he struggled to keep up with the relentless pressure of the hero's assault. In the midst of her acrobatic maneuvers, the hero let out a mocking laugh. She continued to taunt him, her confidence unshaken even as the commander's rage boiled over. Both combatants planted their feet firmly, the floor groaning under the weight of their gathering power. Blue energy began to swirl around the hero as she channeled her strength into a specific technique, the northern-style hunting art. Not to be outdone, the commander's body flared with a malevolent orange glow as he activated his iron claw ability, the spines on his back radiating heat. The hero unleashed her Sun Splitter, a frontal continuous strike that filled the room with a blinding lattice of energy. The commander met the attack head-on, their powers clashing in a violent display of orange and blue. A massive explosion of sparks and fire erupted at the center of the smithy as the two forces collided. The hero stood her ground amidst the searing heat, her eyes locked on her opponent through the shimmering haze. Yuta watches the intense duel from the sidelines, her golden eyes wide. She can see that the hero is slowly being pushed back by the demon's brute strength. The new generation hero raises her massive blade high, the cold steel reflecting the chaos of the battle. She stands her ground as the duel reaches its breaking point. She tells Yuta that just standing still and reacting won't change anything. To move toward the future, she has to break through the reality of her chains. Clenched between her fingers, 3 specialized daggers begin to hum with a sharp blue energy. They are her hidden ace, waiting for the perfect opening. The hero channels her mana, her eyes glowing with a faint light as she prepares to launch her final strike. The air around her thrums with the sheer power of her resolve. In a sudden blur of motion, she launches the glowing blades directly at her hulking opponent. The 3 projectiles streak through the air, trailing arcs of blue light behind them. The blades find their mark with pinpoint accuracy, embedding themselves into the 8th Corps commander's chest. Sparks of blue electricity immediately begin to dance across his gray skin. The paralysis daggers do their work instantly, sending jolts of energy through the demon's massive frame. The commander freezes in place, completely immobilized by the sudden strike. He realizes too late that the entire sword fight was just a feint to land these daggers. The hero smirks, noting how difficult it's going to be for him to move a single muscle now. Standing over the fallen demon, she explains that a master swordsman always has more than just one trick up their sleeve. In the background, Yuta watches the power shift with a mix of awe and terror. Despite being paralyzed, the commander grins, reminding her that this forge is swarming with his loyal troops. A horde of demonic reinforcements rages through the corridors, their monstrous growls echoing through the stone halls. They are a tide of teeth and claws coming to their master's aid. The hero isn't worried in the slightest, her smile only widening at his threat. She's already planned for this. She reveals that her lovely disciple is already outside, taking care of the cleanup. In the dark corridors, the lovely disciple draws her blade, her red eyes glowing with predatory intent as she faces the horde. The hero is confident that by now, there's nothing left for the reinforcements to do. Yuta looks back toward the entrance, uncertain of what's happening outside. Walking through the dust and carnage, the disciple carries the severed head of a monster as if it were nothing. Her expression is calm, despite the fresh blood staining her clothes. The commander grits his teeth, desperately searching for a way to break the paralysis. If he can just remove those daggers, the fight isn't over yet. He barks at Yuta, ordering his forging slave to hurry up and pull the blades from his chest. Yuta trembles, her body leaning forward out of instinctual obedience as she stammers out a submissive reply. The trauma of 10 years of servitude is a heavy weight on her shoulders. The hero's gaze pierces through the tension, her voice sharp as she addresses the girl. She calls her by her trade, not her status. She gives Yuta a final ultimatum. Change her life right now, or remain a slave for the rest of her days. Yuta's hand hovers near the heavy blacksmith hammer at her waist. The hero asks her what her true reason for living is. A vision of Yuta's father and the master smiths of Vulcania flashes through her mind. He gives her one final charge, to carry on their spirit and never let their legacy die. Yuta looks down, the scar on her face a constant reminder of the day she lost everything. She finally admits to herself that she wants to know her purpose. She stares at the paralyzed demon who has been her master for a decade. The fear in her eyes is finally starting to turn into something else. Her resolve hardens as she stands her ground, the smithy's heat mirroring the fire starting in her eyes. Standing tall, Yuta prepares to make her choice. She grips her slave chains tight, and they explode with a brilliant golden light. Today is the day everything changes. Her dark silhouette stands framed by a wall of intense heat and sparks. She is no longer just a slave, but a blacksmith holding the tools of her own liberation. The commander breaks out in a cold sweat, screaming at her to stop. He finally sees the true threat standing before him, but he's powerless to act. Yuta raises her massive hammer high above her head. She declares that she will never answer to that slave title again. The memory of her father's hammer strikes resonates in her mind, fueling her strength. She remembers who she truly is. The massive hammer connects with an earth-shattering impact, sending a shockwave through the entire smithy. She finally shouts her true name to the world, the blacksmith Garantia Yuta. Dust and debris settle over a ruined landscape. Garantia Yuta looks down, the iron chains of her heavy slave collar now completely snapped and destroyed. The new generation hero stands before her, clearly impressed by the hidden strength she sensed in the girl. Yuta clutches a small hammer, her eyes filled with doubt as she looks up at the legendary warrior. The new generation hero turns her back, telling Yuta that once she finds people she trusts, she'll finally get everything she wants. She rests a hand on her sword, quoting her master's motto about the strength found in enjoying one's own craft. With a confident smirk, the new generation hero asks if she should take the girl to the legendary Artisans street. The mention of the city triggers a memory of Yuta's father, who once promised to take her there himself. Tears well up and spill over as Yuta remembers the life she lost. The girl looks up with red-rimmed eyes, pleading for the warrior to take her to the fabled city of craftsmen. Her mind drifts back to the long years spent making weapons while bound in heavy, cold shackles. Even in her darkest moments, she spent every moment at the anvil, dreaming of a life where she could create what she desired. The new generation hero smiles and leads the way, calling for the young blacksmith to follow her. The story jumps forward 1 year, shifting the scene to a jagged desert canyon. A hooded figure stands on the edge of the cliffs, watching the wind howl through the valley below. This tale takes place before the skeletal messenger, Edward Beinlira, descended from the mountains to start a world-altering war. Back then, Artisan's street was a boiling pot of ambition, where everyone's secret desires were on full display. A scarred woman holds up a glowing mana stone, knowing the greedy elders of the city would kill to take it from her. Down in the canyon, a literal sea of demonic monsters surges through the dust. In the present day, Garantia Yuta and her partner Ash look down at the massive horde from their vantage point. The blacksmith readies her latest masterpiece, a water-attuned trident that begins to glow with a brilliant blue light. She leaps straight into the center of the swarm, swinging the weapon to summon a literal tidal wave. Water erupts in every direction as Yuta pushes the trident to its absolute limit. A massive hydrovortex forms, sucking dozens of monsters into its spinning currents. Yuta's eyes glow with a manic intensity as the battle begins to heat up. She laughs, calling the monsters her bobbies, and promising to turn them into beautiful new weapons. The trident continues to churn out a flood of water, drowning everything at the bottom of the canyon. Ash joins the fray, hoisting her gargantuan blade and cleaving through anything that escapes the vortex. A massive explosion of earth and water sends shockwaves through the canyon. From the center of the storm, a towering demonic beast is shredded by the sheer pressure of the vortex. Yuta watches as the water vortex tightens, crushing the life out of the remaining demonic swarm. The last few monsters are pulled into the eye of the storm, helpless against the crushing tide. When the water finally recedes, it leaves behind a massive crater filled with the remains of the horde. Ash looks at the broken tool in her partner's hand and points out that the masterpiece just shattered under the pressure. Yuta lets out a comical, frustrated yell, devastated that her weapon didn't last longer. She quickly shrugs it off, happy that she at least walked away with a mountain of fresh materials. Looking over a literal forest of various high-grade blades, Yuta realizes she has plenty of work ahead of her. It's time to head back to the forge and turn today's combat data into an even stronger masterpiece. Inside the workshop, the furnace roars to life, casting a warm orange glow over the anvil. Yuta grips her heavy smithing hammer, ready to get back to work. Sparks fly with every strike as she pours her focus into shaping a new piece of red-hot metal. She lets out a long breath and wipes away the sweat, satisfied after a long day at the forge. Garantia Yuta pauses her work, holding up the glowing orange katana as she senses a sudden, heavy shift in the atmosphere. Ash remains sprawled out on her back, groaning about the annoyance of whatever disturbance they've both just felt. Yuta lets out a sharp, knowing smirk as she recognizes the presence that has just entered their territory. She stands tall in the center of her forge, confirming that the man they've been waiting for has finally returned to Artisans Street. Elsewhere in the city, the party led by Sir Hero arrives, greeted by the low murmurs and curious stares of the local residents. They walk through the open gates of the village that serves as the legendary home to the continent's most skilled blacksmiths. From above the scale of Artisans Street is clear, a sprawling industrial hub filled with massive smokestacks and stone workshops. The market is bustling with activity, every corner packed with high-quality gear and experimental weaponry. The party's blue mage can barely contain her excitement, pointing out that this place is a literal holy land for any adventurer. Guided by their porter boy, the group approaches their destination, though Sir Hero notes that the reality is quite different from the rumors he's heard. They stop in front of a stone building, marked with the sign for the Half-Love Forge. Inside, the shop is quiet and empty, with long shadows stretching across the floor between racks of axes and spears. Sir Hero leads the way in, deciding to wait for the owner as the blue mage asks him to clarify what he meant by those rumors. He rests his chin on his hand, nodding that he expected the local artisans to be far more rowdy and aggressive than they appear. The porter boy explains that the calm is forced, as everyone here is bound by the strict and ancient rules of the street. He gestures toward an illustration of the consequences, where breaking those rules leads to permanent banishment or worse. The rules are brutal, often resulting in the loss of a limb, which Sir Hero dismisses as a likely bluff. A deep voice cuts through the conversation, cold and certain, confirming that the threats are very much real. Baron Brooke steps out from the back of the shop, looking over the newcomers with a dismissive, world-weary expression. The stocky forge owner crosses his arms, asking what a high-ranking hero's party could possibly want in his workshop. Sir Hero doesn't waste time with pleasantries, stating plainly that they've come in search of a monster weapon. The air in the room suddenly chills as Baron Brooke's face hardens, calling the hero's request a load of trash. He makes it clear that crafting or selling such dangerous tools is the street's most sacred taboo. Baron Brooke turns his back on them, telling the party to get out while secretly lamenting the lost coin from a hero's purse. Sir Hero's face drops into shadow, his tone turning cold as he mentions a weapon engraved with the horn and hammer crest. The blue mage flinches, sensing the sudden and dangerous shift in her leader's demeanor. A manic orange flame ignites in Sir Hero's eye as he begins to lose his grip on his sanity. His mage watches in horror, sweating as she realizes his state has been deteriorating ever since he acquired his last sword. She begs him to stop, but Sir Hero has already decided that their time is being wasted. In a flash of sudden violence, he turns on his own ally, splattering blood across the floor as he strikes her down. He stands over the fallen mage, coldly remarking that 2 sacrifices should be more than enough to get what he wants. The porter boy collapses against the wall, his face pale and eyes wide with pure terror as he watches his master snap. Sir Hero turns his aggression toward Baron Brooke, a spray of blood painting the air as he demands information. He hoists a horrific, fleshy blade lined with teeth and eyes, declaring he'll keep killing until someone brings him a monster weapon. With a command to his blade, Urasiththan, the weapon begins to pulsate and expand, releasing a wave of dark, pink energy. The quiet street outside the forge is suddenly bathed in an eerie, ominous light. A massive explosion rips through the building, shattering the stone walls and sending debris flying into the sky. Baron Brook groans as he tries to crawl out from under the heavy wooden beams and stone rubble of his shop. He looks up, his face bruised and eyes filled with shock at the nightmare unfolding before him. The hero's sword has transformed into a towering, grotesque mass of living muscle, multiple eyes and snapping maws. Panic erupts in the street as the local artisans drop their tools and scream, fleeing for their lives. The monstrous Urusich then looms over the ruins, its many mouths open and ready to consume anything in its path. Baron Brook lies wounded in the debris of his forge, gasping as he tells Sir Hero that such senseless violence won't force anyone to break the sacred taboo. Sir Hero stands in the center of the wreckage, his tattered green cloak fluttering in the wind as he grips the grotesque, tooth-lined blade of Urusich. With blood trickling from his forehead, Brook warns the knight that every time he uses that monster weapon, it corrupts his very body and mind. Sir Hero ignores the warning and begins to walk forward, his boots crunching on the stone as he declares that nothing else matters to him. He stares into the distance, his mind flashing back to a younger version of himself standing before a legendary figure in a desolate landscape. In his memory, a figure riddled with arrows kneels before a massive, pulsating monster weapon that seems to offer a dark, irresistible power. A demonic voice whispers in his mind, urging him to use that dark strength to finally achieve all of his hidden, selfish desires. Sir Hero raises the fleshy blade high, his orange eye burning with a manic intensity as he vows to use the monster weapon to become a true hero. He lets out a psychotic grin, his face twisted in madness as he swings the heavy, multi-eyed sword downward with all his might. The air screams as the monster weapon strikes, creating a brilliant, blinding flash of light as it collides with a sudden, immovable defense. Ash has appeared, blocking the strike with her own massive blade, sparks flying from the impact as she holds her ground against the hero. The hero recoiled in shock, his crazed eye widening as he stared at the young girl. A voice revealed that she somehow knew the secret name of his weapon. Yuta doesn't attack immediately. Instead, she reaches out and affectionately strokes the fleshy surface of Urusich like it's a lost pet. She leans her head against her hand with a sharp, predatory smirk, nodding that the monster weapon's performance hasn't dropped a bit since she last saw it. Sir Hero's face contorts with rage at her familiarity, his teeth baring as he prepares to strike the girl who dares to touch his precious blade. With a casual whoops, Yuta easily sidesteps his frantic slash, her movements fluid and unbothered by the sheer weight of her gear. She lands firmly on the rubble-strewn ground, her boots kicking up dust as she prepares to settle the score with the unstable knight. Looking back over her shoulder, Yuta scolds Baron Brook, telling the old man that he really needs to stop accepting such trashy adventurers as customers. Ash, looking as bored and lethargic as ever, supports the wounded Baron Brook, her hand resting firmly on his shoulder as she watches the fight unfold. Brook is terrified for her, begging Yuta not to use that, and asking if she has forgotten the absolute taboo of Artisan Street. Yuta retorts that sticking to those cowardly rules is exactly what led him to be defeated and buried under his own workshop. She grips the handle of her massive smithing hammer, yellow arcs of electricity dancing around the metal head as she prepares to unleash its full power. With a defiant shout to screw the rules, she swings her glowing hammer down toward the cracked stone floor of the forge. A massive pillar of fire and energy erupts from the ground, shattering what remains of the building and sending a shockwave through the entire street. Sir Hero is blown back by the force, his eyes widening in realization as he suspects that she has tapped into a hidden underground dragon vein. As the smoke and flames clear, Yuta is revealed standing atop a mound of rubble, surrounded by several massive, otherworldly weapons stuck in the earth. She walks through the wall of fire, asking the knight if these were the legendary tools he had been so desperately searching for. With a cold, dismissive gesture, she tells him to feast his eyes on the collection of forbidden masterpieces she's been keeping hidden. Yuta stands amidst her creations, her shadow stretching long over the floor as she introduces them as her personal monster weapon masterpieces. Sir Hero lets out a high-pitched, manic laugh, ecstatic at the sight of so many monster weapons and the realization that she was the one hiding them. Yuta simply smirks and says, "Bingo," acknowledging that he's finally figured out the secret of Artisan Street. She catches the handle of her heavy hammer, the weapon spinning through the air as she prepares to give the hero the reward he deserves. With a sharp, dangerous gleam in her eyes, she tells him that since he got the answer right, He's earned himself a special prize. She delivered a devastating strike, sending her blade flying toward the hero at light speed, catching him completely off guard. The collision was so powerful it nearly shattered his armor. Yuta continues her relentless assault, mocking him as he frantically tries to dodge her overwhelming speed and power. The hero was left reeling in horror, staring in disbelief as he realized a single attack had sliced his arm clean off. She spins her hammer in a blurring circle, a wide, manic grin splitting her face as she tells the knight not to be so shy. Yuta creates multiple afterimages of her weapon as she prepares another barrage, promising that she has plenty more rewards to hand out. A series of ear-piercing clangs echoed through the ruins as Yuta's hammer repeatedly struck the weapons, swinging them like a baseball bat to launch them at the hero. The hero couldn't even manage to defend himself, his body being riddled with holes from the constant barrage. Blood-splattered and panting, the knight glares at Yuta with pure, unadulterated hatred, calling her a piece of trash. He lets out a primal scream of rage, his face twisted in a mask of bloody fury as he demands to know how a common girl dares to stand against him. Sir Hero lets out a blood-curdling scream, demanding that his blade spew forth its full hidden power. The monster's sword, Artisan, responds by expanding into a colossal, multi-eyed horror of flesh and bone that towers over the ruined forge. Garantia Yuta stands calmly beneath the shadow of the massive creature, unimpressed by the knight's ultimate display of firepower. She reaches for a large, black sword of her own, its hilt wrapped in heavy leather as she prepares to show him the true nature of her craft. With a jagged cut across her palm, Yuta declares that she will demonstrate how a monster weapon is truly meant to be used. A dark, ominous light flickers in her one good eye as she whispers a command to her blade. "Drag him down, Hades." A torrent of spectral gray hands erupts from a void at Yuta's feet, reaching upward like a sea of lost souls. The ghastly hands lunge for the Artisan monster, their fingers clawing into its pulsating red flesh and tearing at its many eyes. In a chaotic swirl of green energy and shadows, the spectral tide begins to drag the fleshy monstrosity back into the depths of the earth. Sir Hero stands in the center of the receding darkness, his face splattered with blood and his expression one of total, hollow bewilderment. He looks down in a daze as the spectral hands find him, their cold grip tightening around his legs and pulling him toward the ground. Panic finally breaks through his madness as he thrashes against the unseen force, screaming for the hands to let him go. Yuta stands amid the settling dust and smoke, the aftermath of her devastating attack leaving her breathless but victorious. She explains that while human blood can activate these weapons, their true, terrifying power is only unleashed through the wielder's own life force. She wipes the grime from her face, her chest heaving as she notes that the more blood a monster weapon is fed, the more power it grants in return. Panting from the exertion, Yuta admits that using a weapon like Hades is an ordeal that no normal human should ever have to endure. She looks down at the broken knight, telling him that while she's not sure how he found her baby, Artisan, he saved her the trouble of hunting it down. Yuta stares at the grotesque sword lying in the dirt, noting how its corruptive influence is notorious for gnawing away at its master's sanity. A close-up of Artisan shows its sharp, serrated teeth, a weapon that Yuta says the other smiths only label a taboo because they fear what they don't understand. Sir Hero lies in a pool of his own blood, his gaze flickering and weak as he gasps out a final, desperate question about Yuta's identity. Yuta gazes down at him with a weary but proud smile, her face illuminated by the setting sun as the fire of the battle fades. She simply states that she is the same as all the others on this street. She is a blacksmith and nothing more. A memory of a veteran smith's face appears, his mouth open in a defiant roar as he demands the strongest weapon in the shop. The artisans of the street rise up together, armed with hammers and heavy tools, ready to defend their village and show the world the true strength of a craftsman. Ash, a pragmatic fighter with messy brown hair and animal-like ear tufts, swings her heavy blade in a sharp arc. As a streak of blue energy follows the strike, she casually notes that everyone living here is just a tiny bit stronger than your typical blacksmith. Behind her, the rest of the residents emerge from the smoke, standing shoulder to shoulder. These aren't just simple craftsmen, they're a disciplined line of warriors, each one built like a fortress and ready to defend their territory. Blood drips down Garantia Yuta's face, but she doesn't flinch, wearing a dark, mocking smile. She leans toward her opponent, telling the so-called hero that it's finally time for a proper introduction. Standing tall in front of the massive structures of her home, Yuta officially welcomes the broken knight to Artisans Street. With the other artisans backing her up, she makes it clear that the people who forge the weapons are the ones who truly hold the power. Cut to Garantia, Yuta, and Ash stand outside the massive, cold gates of Artisan Street, having just been kicked out of their own home. Yuta looks back with a look of pure disbelief, still processing the betrayal. Ash isn't exactly offering a shoulder to cry on, reminding her that this is what happens when you spend your time breaking every taboo the village has. Yuta just grumbles as the weight of the banishment starts to sink in. Ash starts throwing a fit of her own, kicking Yuta and complaining about why she had to be banished along with her. Yuta doesn't really have an answer for that one. She's just as annoyed as her partner. The truth is, Yuta is a blacksmith with skills that completely break the balance of the world. But despite her genius, she's still got the temper of a frustrated kid. She throws herself onto the ground, sobbing and screaming about the injustice of it all. It's a full-blown tantrum from one of the most dangerous people on the planet. What Yuta didn't realize was that crafting monster weapons wasn't just a taboo, it was a threat to the old order. Men like Colt Karen were watching her progress with growing resentment. The older generation of artisans didn't care about progress. They were just jealous of an apprentice who was already light years ahead of them in talent. Artisan Street had already been corrupted by money and ego, leaving little room for a true master of the craft. An old customer's dismissal was enough to set the elders on edge. They decided that ruining a young, blank-slate blacksmith was a small price to pay for maintaining their own fragile status. They wanted her gone so they could keep the spotlight for themselves. Yuta stares back at the towers of the city, her tears finally drying up as a cold, sharp resolve takes their place. She knew those old fossils would pull a stunt like this eventually. Ash looks at her skeptically, asking what the plan is now that they've been permanently exiled, and all of Yuta's weapons have supposedly been turned into scrap metal. Yuta's response is immediate and violent. She's going to go back in there and smash the entire district to pieces. Ash tries to talk some sense into her, but it's clearly not working. She hoists her massive hammer into the air, yelling about blowing the whole place sky high. Ash grabs her arm, desperately trying to stop her from doing something she'll regret. Just as they're arguing, the mechanical eye on Yuta's hammer snaps open, pulsing with a deep crimson light. It's a sight that stops both of them dead in their tracks. The hammer starts vibrating violently, pieces of the head shifting and glowing as if it's reacting to something nearby. Ash is completely baffled, wondering what could possibly be triggering the weapon now. Yuta stares at the hammer in shock, unable to explain why it's activating all on its own after they've already left the city. This wasn't part of any plan. Ash suddenly remembers that big-eyed thing, Elsina, whose tracking abilities had nearly killed them both before Yuta turned it into a hammer. It was built specifically for one purpose. Yuta confirms that the eye was set up to map out and track the nearest monster weapon. If it's glowing like this, it means there's a powerful artifact close by. A beam of orange light shoots out from the hammer's eye, pointing directly back toward the gates they just walked through. Someone inside the city is holding something they shouldn't have. Ash points out the obvious. If all her weapons were supposed to be scrapped, why is the hammer pointing right into the middle of the street? It looks like someone was a little too greedy for their own good. Yuta's expression shifts from surprise to a predatory grin. She isn't just going back for revenge anymore. She's going back to reclaim what's hers from the rats who stole it. She knows Ash well enough to know she wouldn't have let the council take everything. Sure enough, Ash reaches into her cloak, pulling out a hidden hilt with a knowing smirk. A massive curved blade erupts into flames, casting a harsh orange glow over them. Ash asks what the move is, already knowing the answer before Yuta even says a word. Standing tall with their weapons in hand, the two of them look like a pair of demons ready to unleash hell. The plan hasn't changed, it's just gotten a lot more personal. Their target is simple. They're going to level the place that tried to throw them away. With their stolen gear as the fuel, the fire is only just beginning. Before Yuta was cast out, her work was legendary, considered the absolute pinnacle of what Artisan Street could produce. And that didn't sit well with the old guard. Colt Karen, an elder and the owner of his own forge, had seen his reputation slowly rot away as his skills faded with age. He was once the top dog, but those days were long gone. A knight examines one of Karen's blades, practically laughing in his face at the lack of quality. He expected something legendary from an elder, but this was just garbage. The knight mocks his metallurgical skills, leaving Karen to stew in his own embarrassment while his prestige hit rock bottom. Even third-rate adventurers were starting to look down on him. Karen's teeth clench as he listens to the insults, his pride taking a massive hit. He was desperate for anything that could restore his name to its former glory. But everything changed when he witnessed the sheer, terrifying power of a true monster weapon. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a tool of pure destruction. He saw a warrior wielding a serrated, bloody blade that seemed to have a life of its own, tearing through enemies like they were made of paper. It was the power he had been searching for. From the safety of the ruins, Karen watched Yuta test her masterpieces, his jealousy twisting into a sick, obsessive fixation. He couldn't believe a girl like her was capable of creating such things. Watching her use the weapon, Hades, to slaughter beasts with ease, Karen was convinced that this wasn't something a mere human should be capable of. It was cheating in his eyes. A single weapon with the performance to wipe out an entire village was a terrifying prospect. But to Karen, it was the key to reclaiming his throne as the street's greatest smith. He knew that if he could just get his hands on one of those weapons, his problems would be solved. He didn't care how he got it, only that it belonged to him. The council trial was nothing more than a show. Karen stood before the other elders, using their ancient taboos as a weapon to silence his only rival. With a smug air of superiority, the council handed down their verdict. Every monster weapon Yuta ever made was to be scrapped, and she was to be permanently banished from the city. Yuta screamed at them, calling them all useless old geezers, but her protests fell on deaf ears. She was dragged away, leaving her legacy in their greedy hands. Karen watched her go with a cold, triumphant smirk, knowing he had finally won. He had used every bit of his political power as an elder to make sure things went exactly how he wanted. Instead of destroying the weapons like he promised, he had them moved to his own private forge. He finally had what he wanted, a true monster weapon that he could claim as his own. Sitting in the dark, clutching his prize, Karen lets out a twisted, satisfied laugh. He thinks he's the greatest blacksmith on the street again, but he has no idea what he's just invited into his home. In a quiet alleyway inside the city, a heavy manhole cover starts to rattle and shift, as if something is trying to push its way out. Ash carefully slides the cover aside and peeks out, scanning the area to make sure there aren't any guards patrolling nearby. She pulls herself up while Garantia Yuta climbs out behind her, grumbling about how her secret testing tunnel is now being used as a back door into the city. They stand on a ledge overlooking a massive underground complex. It's the secret heart of Artisans, Street, where the stolen weapons are being kept. Ash pulls out a pair of binoculars to scout the facility, while Yuta stands beside her with a look of focused irritation. Down in the courtyard, a group of workers is busy moving large, heavy crates under the watchful eye of several supervisors. Yuta takes the binoculars, wondering who in the city has the kind of power needed to coordinate an operation this massive. She spots a familiar face through the lens. It's Colt Karen, the elder who led the council to banish her in the first place. She watches him hunched over a workbench, desperately trying to reverse engineer the secrets of her monster weapons. Yuta realizes he's trying to steal her technology to save his own failing forge and restore his lost reputation. Ash asks if she's going to report the theft to the higher-ups on Artisan Street now that they have proof. Yuta just gives a sharp, dangerous grin. Reporting him is too slow. She'd much rather just smash everything to dust. Ash is a bit worried, pointing out that it's just the two of them against an entire facility full of people. Yuta just looks at her with pure, arrogant confidence. She has a weapon that's more than enough to handle whatever Karen throws at them. Inside the workshop, Karen is admiring a bone-colored spear, already dreaming about the power and money mass-producing it will bring. His dreaming is cut short when a subordinate bursts in, screaming that Yuta has already breached the underground laboratory and is rampaging. Yuta is a blur of red hair and violence, smashing through guards with her hammer as she hunts for the man who stole her work. She shouts for the bald, thieving cat to come out and face her, her eyes glowing with a cold, predatory light. A guard lunges at her with a sword, yelling that she's nothing but a pathetic exile who doesn't belong here anymore. Yuta doesn't even blink, catching his strike and sending him crashing into the ground with a single, brutal hit. The force of the impact shatters the floor, sending a massive shockwave and a cloud of dust through the room. She stands amidst the wreckage, a silent promise of destruction as she waits for more guards to challenge her. Colt Karen finally steps out, acting like he's meeting an old friend instead of the girl he just betrayed. He has the nerve to thank her, claiming that her weapons will be the foundation that makes his forge the best in the city once again. He boasts that her technology is better off in the hands of a master like him, looking down on her with absolute arrogance. Karen looks down at her with pure condescension, convinced that his plan has already succeeded and she's just a minor nuisance. With a snap of his fingers, a group of masked, high-level fighters, The underworld mercenaries emerge from the shadows to surround her. Yuta's expression tightens. She recognizes these killers and realizes that the thieving old man is really playing for keeps. Karen orders his mercenaries to kill her right where she stands, his face twisting into a mask of pure, murderous intent. Yuta reaches for her sword, her thumb clicking the hilt as she centers herself for the coming battle. A mercenary leaps at her from the shadows, his blade coming down in a swift overhead strike. Yuta whispers an activation command, "Extend your 1,000 hands." She isn't just going to fight, she's going to unleash. The mercenary flinches in midair, as he realizes too late that her weapon is glowing with a sudden, violent heat. Yuta unleashes a massive technique called Flammenwerfer, sending whips of fire erupting from her body in every direction. She explains that the move creates a perfect, omnidirectional defense that no attacker can easily bypass. Even as another mercenary tries to strike from a blind spot, the fire whips lash out and block the attack before it can connect. A massive explosion of fire and pressure sends several mercenaries flying backward, their coordination momentarily shattered. Yuta complains with a smirk that attacking while she's explaining her move is a pretty dirty way to fight. More mercenaries close in, showing that they aren't afraid of death and are far more skilled than the average guard. Yuta starts to feel the pressure as they coordinate their strikes, their cold efficiency making it hard to find an opening. She gives a sharp, confident grin, asking if they aren't focusing a bit too much of their attention on just one person. Ash suddenly drops from the ceiling like a silent shadow, catching the mercenaries completely off guard. Garantia Yuta stands amidst the smoke and chaos, her face lit by the flickering orange glow of the nearby fires as she prepares to follow up on Ash's entrance. She threw the demonic blade toward her partner, while the mercenaries finally panicked as they realized they had focused too much on Yuta and left their employer standing all alone. Ash caught the hilt with practiced ease. Now, her task was much easier since Yuta had drawn all the attention to herself. Ash looked up with a cold, focused stare, Yuta's reminder echoing in her mind that even though that blacksmith had retired, he was still far superior to any ordinary mercenary. She lunged straight toward the bald blacksmith, her heavy boots kicking up dust as Colt Karen watched with growing panic and shock. Outside the hidden facility, thick plumes of black smoke rise into the sky, signaling the destructive intensity of the battle raging below. Karen wiped the sweat from his brow, his confidence wavering as he realized that the exiles he had looked down upon had nearly shredded his defenses to pieces. A shot shows that Ash has been intercepted by a mercenary just as she was about to reach the old blacksmith. Suddenly, a surge of magical heat erupted, and Ash wore a look of pure satisfaction as she declared to the old blacksmith that things wouldn't end so simply. She gripped her sword and uttered a command, flames flaring up intensely as she prepared to unleash a high-level technique. Ash becomes the center of a roaring vortex of fire. The Flammenwerfer technique incinerates the air around her in a blinding display of magical power. Karen flinched and raised his staff to shield his face, but that wasn't her target. With a clean, swift strike, she sliced the spear shaft in two, leaving him in total shock. His eyes go wide as he realizes that Ash wasn't aiming her attack at the mercenaries, but at the stolen molar spear lying on the ground. Ash gracefully stepped back, dodging the reach of the two guards. Karen yells at her in a panic, horrified that she would dare to destroy a masterpiece that he considers his own property. Yuta stands tall amidst the smoke and flips him off with a mocking grin, telling him exactly what happens when someone messes with her bobbies without permission. Karen tries to regain his composure, scoffing that breaking a single weapon won't stop him from claiming the rest of her research. Yuta's smile turns dark and predatory as she asks if he really believed that a monster's corpse was the only material needed for a monster weapon. A look of pure dread starts to crawl across Karen's face as the true meaning of her words begins to sink in. The broken molar spear on the ground begins to vibrate violently, its glow intensifying as the magical contract binding its power is severed. Yuta explains that by breaking the weapon, she's shattered the bond that kept the material's original owner from manifesting. Karen stammers, his mind racing as he tries to make sense of her warning, but the air in the room is already starting to change. She mocks him one last time, calling him a bald, thieving cat who doesn't have the slightest clue about the true nature of her craft. Yuta explains that a true monster weapon blacksmith forms bonds with beings that exist far beyond the realm of ordinary humans. The spear is suddenly engulfed in a pillar of golden fire, and the atmosphere becomes heavy with an ancient, overwhelming presence. Lightning crackles around Yuta's outstretched arms, as she declares that a thief like Karen could never hope to understand her domain. A massive, swirling gate of dark energy tears open in the center of the laboratory, shocking everyone left standing in the room. A giant, scaly maw lined with razor-sharp teeth emerges from the darkness, a booming voice welcoming his doctor back. Karen collapses to his knees, his face pale and his eyes fixed on the impossible ancient creature manifesting before him. The massive blue dragon Belior's fully emerges from the gate, his presence filling the laboratory and casting a terrifying shadow over the humans. Belior's growls that the magic power in his molar has finally reconnected, and the sensation is driving him toward a state of fury. His glowing red eye narrows as he looks down at the tiny figures below, his voice dripping with ancient, barely restrained power. Yuta looks up at her massive, patient, with a casual smirk, asking Belior's if his old toothache has started to act up again. Karen trembles as Yuta points a finger at him, telling the dragon that these humans were the ones responsible for breaking his treatment. Belior's turns his head toward the mercenaries and Karen, his expression one of pure, draconic contempt for the barbaric monkeys in his sight. Yuta gives the dragon a mischievous grin, asking him to go ahead and punish the bad guys who were bothering her and stealing her work. Belior's lets out a low, rumbling growl of agreement, his body crackling with a massive buildup of electrical and fire energy. A final, terrifying realization echoes through the chamber as the dragon prepares to unleash the full extent of his ancient wrath. Belior's roars, his mouth filling with blinding fire and lightning as he vows to erase every trace of the foolish humans from the world. A hand swirls a glass of red wine. It's a scene of high-class relaxation, but the words spoken are dripping with fake sympathy. The blonde elder looks out over the sprawling city of Artisans street, glass raised in a mock tribute. He admits Yuta had talent, but she made the mistake of breaking their rules, and now she's gone. Inside the Council of Elders Hall, the mood is celebratory. They discuss how they only brought Yuta in to keep her legendary skills under their thumb. Baron Brook sits at the table, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else with a bandage still on his cheek. The elder doesn't let him off easy, calling him out for protecting Yuta when he was supposed to be watching her. The elder leans in, his smile sharp as he reminds Brook that he's lucky to still have a seat at this table. Anyone else would have been kicked out right alongside the girl. Brook can only look down, sweat beads forming on his forehead. He warns that trying to crush people like this only guarantees they'll blow up in your face eventually. The elder just laughs it off, raising his glass even higher. In his eyes, commoners are just animals that need a strong hand to stay in line. He starts to call for a toast to their absolute control, but the timing couldn't be worse. A massive shockwave rocks the building, shattering the peace he was just bragging about. The celebratory mood evaporates as the room shakes and dust starts raining from the ceiling. The elder's smug expression is replaced by pure confusion. A messenger practically kicks the door down, gasping for air. He screams the news that turns everyone's blood cold. Yuta and Ash have returned to the city. The elder's hand starts shaking so hard the wine in his glass begins to slosh over the rim. Rage and terror twist his face as he realizes his easy life just ended. The glass shatters in his grip as he spits out their names through gritted teeth. Outside, the city has become a war zone. Belior's lets out a deafening roar, his massive form looming over the panicked crowds as they scramble for their lives. The very foundations of the street begin to fail, stone and mortar cracking under the pressure of the dragon's presence. Inside the workshops, the ceiling starts to cave in. Artisans who thought they were safe are now looking up at their own deaths. The destruction is on a level none of them were prepared for. This isn't some low-level monster attack. It's a catastrophe that's leveling entire blocks. Deep in the greenlit forge, everything is going wrong. Colt Karen watches his stolen projects fail, and for once, he realizes he's in way over his head. His workers scream for help as the workshop collapses around them, but Karen is frozen. He finally understands the price of messing with a weapon he didn't create. A massive chunk of the ceiling breaks loose, hurtling straight toward the man who thought he could steal genius. The stone slams into the ground with a sickening thud, burying the forge in a cloud of thick dust. Karen manages to crawl behind a rock, gasping for air in the ruins. He thought stealing Yuta's weapon would be an easy shortcut to the top. He stares blankly at the devastation, his pride shattered. He wanted to surpass his limits, but instead, he's lost everything. A heavy boot steps into the rubble, moving toward the broken old man. A familiar voice rings out, mocking him. Garantia Yuta stands there, sword casually resting on her shoulder. She looks at her former master and asks if he really thought he could master her craft just by peeking at her notes. She stares him down, her eyes cold. These aren't just tools you can sell for a profit. They're something far more dangerous. She shifts her weight, her hand tightening on the hilt. She reminds him that true power isn't free. It demands a price that men like him are never willing to pay. Her eyes begin to glow with an intense, haunting light. She's willing to risk everything for her craft, even if it means her life. Karen can only stare up at her, trembling. He spent his whole life being greedy, and now he's facing the one person who truly understands what he's lost. A blade glows with the heat of a literal monster forge, its edge wreathed in flames. This is the ancient method of the masters, passed down through blood and fire. These weapons have been sought after by the greatest heroes and the most terrifying demon kings throughout history. Men have sold their souls and thrown away their lives just to hold a piece of this power for a single moment. A massive beast towers over a lone warrior, but the weapon in his hand is the ultimate equalizer. In the wrong hands, it's a curse. In the right ones, it's a miracle. With one clean strike, the warrior cleaves through the monster. The power is undeniable, a force that changes the very era it's born into. Yuta doesn't care about being good or heroic. She only cares about crafting the ultimate tool for the one person strong enough to change the world. She stands tall amidst the wreckage, her presence commanding. This is who she is, Garantia Yuta, the monster blacksmith. From Karen's perspective, she looks less like a girl and more like a force of nature as she towers over him in the ruins. Karen tries to laugh it off, mocking her for talking so big while standing in a pile of rubble. He forces a smirk, daring her to see how long she can keep up that tough act. He tells her she'll realize it soon enough, that underneath all that talent, she's just as greedy and desperate as he is. Yuta just dismisses him. She looks up toward the sky and calls out a name that makes the ground shake. Beliors. The massive head of the dragon appears right behind her, his glowing eyes fixed on the man who thought he was in charge. With a sharp movement, she leaps away from the wreckage, leaving her old master alone with his failure and the beast. As the city burns, Yuta looks down at the wreckage. She tells Karen to just sit there and watch everything he's ever built crumble to pieces. She stands atop Beliors, her red hair whipping in the wind. She's decided they aren't alike at all. A blacksmith who's lost their drive is the last thing she ever wants to be compared to. Yuta's expression is cold, eyes fixed on the man who betrayed her. She's done with the games and the politics of the council. Beliors lets out a thunderous roar, his massive wings beating against the smoke-filled sky. He prepares to follow Yuta's lead as they fly over the ruins. Below them, Karen is left in the dirt, surrounded by the debris of his failed ambition. He can only swear under his breath as the shadow of the dragon passes over him. Yuta leans forward, patting Belior's thick scales. She gives him the green light to smash everything to bits, making sure to mention that her weapon chest is the only thing he needs to spare. A pile of sealed wooden chests sits among the rubble, vibrating with an unstable energy. If Beliors isn't careful, breaking those chests will trigger a chain reaction that'll send the weapons flying across the continent. Yuta lets out a nervous chuckle, a drop of sweat rolling down her face. She knows that if those chests break, it'll be a total disaster. Beliors brings his massive foot down, crushing the stone and the crates underneath. The sound of splintering wood and cracking rock echoes through the street. Yuta's eyes go wide as the dragon ignores her warning. Beliors lets out a confused growl, his red eyes darting around as the magic begins to react. Yuta is frozen in shock, her mouth hanging open as the ground starts to glow beneath them. Everything she feared is about to happen. Beliors looks back at her, his expression almost sheepish. He mentions that his tooth feels much better now, so he asks if it's okay if he just heads out. Inside the broken chests, the monster weapons start to pulse with brilliant light. Blue and green energy arcs across the blades as they resonate with the dragon's magic. A massive explosion of light erupts from the center of the ruins. The weapons are launched into the sky like multicolored meteors, trailing fire and mana behind them. From Yuta's perspective atop Beliors, she watches her children scatter. They fly off in every direction, disappearing into the clouds above the city. The streaks of light paint the sky, heading toward distant horizons. The catastrophe she was worried about has officially begun. Far from the city, an elf stands on a massive tree branch, watching a yellow streak of light crash into the forest nearby. The shockwave rustles the leaves as the weapon finds its new home. In a frozen wasteland, a warrior clad in thick furs and iron plate looks up in awe. A glowing blue blade has plunged into the snow right in front of him, radiating an intense power. One of the flaming weapons smashes through the roof of a distant castle, the impact lighting up the night sky. The sheer force of the landing sends debris flying everywhere. A king and his guards stand in the throne room, staring at the glowing red spear that has embedded itself in the floor. The air around the weapon is shimmering with heat and mana. Deep in the jungle, A pair of giants looked down in confusion at the tiny, glowing dagger that had landed in the palm of one of them. They had never seen anything like it before. Ash stands in the middle of a desolate canyon, watching the last of the lights fade from the sky. Her expression is flat as she realizes just how much work they have ahead of them. She can only smirk and admit that they're completely screwed. The scale of the cleanup job is almost hilarious. Yuta is on the verge of tears, screaming at the sky. She calls the dragon a stupid lizard for ruining everything she'd planned. She doubles over, panting from exhaustion. The journey to track down the first weapon has already pushed her to her limit. Ash and Yuta stand on a rocky outcrop, looking out over a foggy, barren landscape. Yuta questions if this is even the right place, despite what her tracking hammer says. Yuta's hammer, Elsian's gaze, features a massive, glowing red eye that seems to be looking around on its own. It gives a slight nod as Ash asks if she's sure about their destination. Yuta points forward, insisting the hammer is never wrong. Ash just sighs, leaning against her massive sword as she complains about how they've been walking forever. Ash looks out over the battlefield, her expression grim. The air is thick with the scent of iron and ash. The valley below is littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers, arrows still protruding from their armor. The silence of the graveyard is only broken by the distant sound of the wind. A lone crow perched on a gnarled branch watches them from the shadows. Its red eyes are fixed on the newcomers as they survey the destruction. They realize they've reached the front lines, the border where humanity is making its last stand against the remnants of the Demon King's army. The atmosphere is heavy with tension. Yuta looks around, admitting that the place brings back memories. Ash is just annoyed that one of the weapons had to land in a dump like this. Yuta closes her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She can't believe the mess they've walked into. A flashback shows Yuta and Ash standing in a clearing as Belior's looms over them. It was because of him that her weapons were scattered across the continent in the first place. The Council of Elders sits at their long table, oblivious to the storm that was coming. They were the ones who forced her hand, leading to this mess. Karen stands in front of the council, his head bowed. To prevent another disaster, the elders had to change their very laws and taboos. They granted Yuta a total monopoly over the monster weapons, essentially putting the future of their craft in her hands. In return, they tasked her with finding every single one of her scattered creations. It was a heavy price to pay for her freedom. Back in the present, Yuta lets out a long sigh. She's stuck in the middle of a war zone and she's not happy about it. She grips the handle of Elsian's gaze, her focus returning. She knows the hammer's eye is never wrong, no matter how much she wishes it was. In the distance, a hooded figure raises a staff that glows with an ominous blue light. A soldier in the background is being lifted off the ground, eyes wide with terror as the magic takes hold. A lone figure in a dark cloak stands atop a mountain of broken blades and fallen soldiers. Wisps of blue mana snake through the air, highlighting the grim aftermath of a one-sided slaughter. The hooded woman smirks, her crimson eyes gleaming with cold amusement under the shadow of her hood. She grips her gnarled staff, the glowing orb at its tip pulsing with a dangerous, unstable energy. A massive text bubble looms over the empty space, reflecting the internal monologue of a defeated soul. The weight of a lifetime's effort feels utterly worthless in the face of such overwhelming power. Yuta and Ash trudge through a desolate, mist-shrouded canyon. Ash carries a massive pack, while Yuta rests her heavy hammer on her shoulder, both weary from their long journey through the wasteland. Ash stops in her tracks, her gray eyes narrowing as she spots something unexpected in the distance. Yuta looks over from behind her, her expression turning skeptical as they witness a bizarre sight. A hand clad in heavy plate armor grips a small wooden wand that looks entirely out of place. Blue electricity crackles and spits from the tip as a low-level spell is desperately cast against the wind. A towering, single-eyed monster looms over a knight, completely unfazed by the tiny sparks of lightning hitting its chest. The creature's muscular blue frame and jagged horns dwarf the armored man below. Vanson Packard grits his teeth, sweat pouring down his face as he repeatedly shouts the incantation for a novice spell. He stands his ground in his silver armor, despite the obvious futility of his attack. The Cyclops stares down with a bored, singular eye, the lightning shock, doing nothing more than tickling its thick scales. The monster doesn't even flinch as the weak magic dissipates harmlessly against its hide. With a sudden, heavy movement, the monster brings its massive foot down toward the struggling knight. Vanson scrambles backward, his heavy armor clanking as he barely avoids being crushed into the dirt. The knight continues his desperate retreat, the ground shaking with every step the giant takes. He shouts about his past glory, a stark contrast to his current pathetic display of novice magic. Ash stepped forward with a predatory grin, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword, and told Yuta to fall back. But Yuta wasn't interested in her partner's hint. She hoisted her massive hammer onto her shoulder, eyeing the giant monster with intense excitement for the fresh materials it would provide. The two women launched themselves into the air with incredible speed, leaving the stunned knight behind. Ash leads the charge, her cloak billowing as she closes the distance to the looming threat. Yuta brought her heavy hammer down in a devastating arc, the force of the pinpoint lock impact sending a shockwave through the monster's skull. Black blood sprayed as the Cyclops let out a final roar. Yuta lands gracefully nearby, a confident smirk on her face as she brushes a bit of dirt from her shoulder. She calls out to the knight, her golden eyes sparkling with mischief. Vanson Packard freezes, his mouth hanging open in utter shock as he stares at the red-haired girl who just appeared. He can hardly process how easily they handled the monster that almost killed him. Yuta leans in, her eyes fixed on the silver-armored man as she comments on the absurdity of his fighting style. She can't help but find it hilarious that a veteran warrior is out here spamming beginner spells. Ash stands beside her, looking completely unimpressed by the knight's confusion. She keeps her hands on her hips, her expression flat as she waits for the introductions to be over. The knight drops to one knee, bowing his head in a show of deep gratitude. He realizes these newcomers aren't ordinary travelers and offers his sincere thanks for his life. Straightening up, he introduces himself as Vanson Packard, a veteran heavy warrior of the Shield Corps. His face is weathered and scarred, showing the toll of many years on the front lines. He turns his back to them, his shoulders slumped as he admits that his days as a true shield warrior are over. The heavy plate armor he wears now seems like a burden rather than protection. In a flashback, a dark purple explosion of magic erupts across the battlefield. Vanson is shown being struck by a curse from a Legion commander, his shield failing to protect him. A white text box explains the cruel nature of the stat inversion ability. Every ounce of the warrior's physical prowess was stripped away and converted into something else. The memory shows Vanson being crushed under the weight of his own equipment. The curse turned his immense physical strength into mana he didn't know how to use, leaving him helpless. Vanson stares at his hands, explaining the bitter irony of his situation. He has the mana pool of an archmage, but none of the knowledge or skill to cast anything useful. Ash brings her fingers up to her face, peering through them as if analyzing the very flow of mana around the knight. Her glowing orange eye fixates on the strange energy radiating from him. She confirms Yuta's suspicion, noting that the man's mana density is truly on par with an archmage. It's a bizarre sight, a powerhouse of magic trapped inside the body of a weakling. Vanson sits cross-legged on the ground, a brilliant blue aura of overflowing mana poolsing around him. He looks dejected, stating that even wearing simple armor is now his limit. Yuta rubs her chin, her eyes narrowing as she pieces the puzzle together. The mention of stat inversion has triggered a very specific memory regarding one of her lost creations. Her golden eyes widen with realization as she confirms her theory. She's found the trail of the weapon that caused this mess, and it's led them straight to the front lines. The image of the hooded woman reappears, her staff glowing with a malevolent light. This Legion commander is the one wielding the power that Yuta needs to reclaim. Vanson grips his wooden wand tightly, his expression turning grim. He mentions the intelligence they've received about an upcoming offensive that could wipe out the last of the veterans. A text bubble details the tragic outcome of the coming battle. Without their strongest warriors, many more of Vanson's comrades will be killed or wounded in the next wave. Another box reflects the knight's deep guilt. He is physically fine but completely unable to protect those who rely on him, a failure he can't seem to get over. Vanson looks down at the dirt, his spirit broken by his own perceived pathetic state. He feels like a shadow of the man he used to be, sitting alone in the rear. Ash crosses her arms, looking at the knight with a mix of pity and calculation. She points out that taking on a Legion commander won't be an easy task for anyone involved. Yuta suddenly pulls out her massive hammer, the cracks on its surface beginning to glow with a fierce red light. She makes a bold proposal to the knight, her eyes burning with determination. Vanson's eyes go wide, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow as he listens to her. He can't believe what he's hearing. This girl is claiming she can restore his ability to fight. The image of the Legion commander looms large in their minds again. She's been using that stolen power to wipe out even the most seasoned warriors on the front. Yuta raises her hammer high, sparks of magical energy flying as she prepares to show him what she's capable of. She has business with that commander, and she needs a way into the battlefield. A large text bubble punctuates the moment with a definitive statement. Yuta is confident that she can fix whatever has been broken, no matter the magical cost. Yuta stands tall against a backdrop of swirling red smoke and embers, her hammer resting ready in her hand. She declares her identity with pride. After all, she is a master blacksmith. A humble forge stands solitary against the base of a towering, jagged cliffside. Wisps of gray smoke curl from the chimney into the darkening sky, signaling the start of a long night's work. Garantia Yuta stands before the open furnace, her back turned as the intense orange glow of the embers washes over her. She monitors the heat with a practiced eye, satisfied that the forge has reached the necessary temperature. The heavy head of her hammer slams down onto the glowing metal, sending a spray of embers across the anvil. Yuta reflects on how chaotic things have been lately, finally having a moment to focus on her true craft between her run-ins with the fake hero and Karen. Wearing her protective goggles, Yuta puts her full weight into every strike, her red hair tied back away from the heat. The ringing of steel on steel echoes through the workshop as she begins to shape the raw materials for Packard's new weapon. Sparks fly up, dancing across the lenses of Yuta's goggles as she maintains a singular focus. The rhythmic violence of the hammer strikes gets her blood pumping, reminding her why she truly loves the art of smithing. Yuta comments that she is only letting Vans and Packard borrow this weapon because of the unique circumstances. She normally wouldn't dream of handing over her work to someone she didn't fully trust. The mustached smith stands with his arms crossed, his expression a mix of skepticism and professional concern. He grumbles about lending out his forge to a complete stranger, especially one who seems so reckless with the equipment. From the shadows of the forge, the smith and Vanzen observe Yuta's relentless pace. While the smith acknowledges her stance is professional, he remains baffled by what exactly she is trying to create from the scrap. The furnace roars with an unnatural intensity, the flames turning from a deep orange to a blinding, brilliant white. The heat radiating from the stone hearth is enough to make any ordinary person back away in fear. The mustached smith lunges forward, his face pale with alarm as he shouts a warning about the runaway temperature. He's convinced that such extreme heat will do nothing but ruin the iron and melt the tools into useless slag. He grips a shovel, ready to intervene before his workshop is destroyed by what he perceives as incompetence. He rants about how even a novice should know better than to push a forge to its absolute limit. Amidst the white-hot inferno, a massive, curved bone sits undisturbed, absorbing the heat without melting. The smith freezes as he realizes Yuta isn't working with common iron at all, but something far more legendary. Yuta pauses, pushing her goggles up onto her forehead and glancing over her shoulder with a sharp, knowing smirk. She casually apologizes for being a bit rough with the equipment, though her tone remains playful and confident. She stands tall, a defiant light in her golden eyes, as she tells the smith to consider this a rare privilege. Very few people ever get to witness the forging of a weapon from such exotic and powerful materials. With a thunderous crack, the hammer descends again, the impact so powerful it seems to warp the air around the anvil. Brilliant white light erupts from the contact point, drowning out the dim lighting of the room. Yuta inspects the rough shape of the long blade, which glows with a steady internal heat. She explains that this isn't just a sword. It's a piece of complex magical machinery designed to handle an immense mana load without shattering. Vanzen Packard listens intently, his brow furrowed as he responds to Yuta's questions about his fighting preferences. The weight of his future rests on the quality of the steel she is currently pounding into shape. He provides the specifications of his former weapon, describing a heavy spatha-style blade with a deep blood groove. He needs something that feels familiar in his hand, even if the power behind it has been inverted by the curse. Yuta grins broadly, raising her hammer as she announces her plan to use dragon bone for the blade. She mentions that the materials they gathered from the monster earlier will be the perfect core to hold the magic circuitry. The mustached smith can only stare in disbelief, a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. The sheer audacity of using dragon materials in a common village forge is completely beyond his comprehension. Yuta plunges the glowing blade into the quenching vat, resulting in a violent eruption of steam and sizzling heat. The metal groans as it rapidly cools, a testament to the incredible durability that only her specialized techniques can achieve. The smith's hand trembles as he watches her pick up a specialized engraving tool, its tip glowing with a faint green light. He's never heard of anyone using materials like these, let alone having the skill to master them. With steady hands, Yuta begins to trace intricate, glowing runes along the length of the blade, just as she saw Sister Magnia do in the past. She works with a precision that makes the smith realize he is witnessing a method he never even knew existed. Sweat pours down Yuta's face as she pours her concentration into the engraving, her eyes fixed on every minute detail of the magical circuitry. She knows there is only one forging method that can handle this level of complexity, and she is determined to perfect it. Watching Garantia Yuta work, a local master known as the Mustached Smith is floored. He recognizes her technique as a divine style meant to emulate the goddess of the forge. He's completely baffled, though. According to every rumor he's heard, the clan that owned that secret was wiped out over 10 years ago. Shaken and sweating, the Mustached Smith pulls Vanson Packard aside. He demands to know exactly who this girl is and where she came from. Packard just gives him the one answer he has. As far as he knows, she's just a blacksmith from Artisan Street. Vanson Packard stands alone, looking out over the town as he reflects on his past. He wonders if it's even possible for him to pick up a shield again after everything he's lost. A memory of his prime flashes through his mind, where he stood at the very front of the line. His massive shield was the only thing between his comrades and a certain death. It was more than just a job, it was his duty and his source of honor. He lived to be the wall that wouldn't break, no matter what the enemy threw at them. Back in the present, Packard's face is etched with doubt. He thinks about the young blacksmith he just met, wondering if their encounter was fate or just a lucky break. He remembers the warmth of the guild hall, filled with the laughter of the people he used to protect. They were a family, sharing meals and stories after a long day on the field. The guild leader, Vanson, would always call out to him to join them, her face lit with a rare smile. That sense of belonging is the one thing he's desperate to reclaim. He's reached a point where he'd give up everything to stand before them as their shield once more. Even his very soul seems like a small price to pay. Garantia Yuta finishes her work, holding up a newly forged blade that glows with heat and runic power. She wipes a smear of soot from her face, a look of triumph in her eyes. She explains that because this wasn't made in her own forge, the weapon is too fragile to even have a proper name. Still, she's confident it can grant its master's deepest wish. She holds the sword out, the runes along the flat of the blade pulsing with light. She decides to call the creation Convert. Yuta turns to Packard, who's standing with his arms crossed as the smoke from the forge swirls around him. She tells him there's one thing they need to settle before he takes it. She calls the weapon a mere workaround, a shortcut that bypasses his limitations. She asks if he can still maintain his pride as a warrior while relying on a method like this. Packard takes a moment to consider her question, admitting that she has a valid point. He's not the type to ignore the reality of his situation, but he thinks getting hung up on the definition of a single word is something only a fool would do. His focus is on the mission, not the title. He slams his fist against his chest, his voice booming as he declares that he is a warrior regardless of the tools he uses. As long as he can protect his comrades, the method doesn't matter. A sharp grin spreads across Yuta's face. She likes his answer, nodding that this is exactly the kind of conviction someone needs to wield one of her weapons. She tells him to get ready, promising to send him straight back to where he belongs. There's a look of mischievous confidence in her eyes. The scene cuts to a snowy battlefield where a desperate struggle is underway. Monsters have surrounded a group of human soldiers who are barely holding on. One of the warriors shouts that their vanguard is too weak to hold back the tide. The absence of their captain is proving to be a fatal blow to their morale. Vanson cleaves through an enemy, her expression harsh as she tells them to stop whining. She orders her people to forget about the one who left and focus on the fight in front of them. She rallies her troops, telling them that they just have to do their duty and hold on no matter what. Her jaw is set tight, refusing to show any sign of weakness. Suddenly, she freezes as she senses a massive surge of mana in the air. The temperature seems to drop as a dangerous presence makes itself known. A blinding sphere of purple light appears in the sky above the battlefield. It's a massive area of effect blast, and there's no time for the soldiers to escape. The demon commander releases the energy, sending a pillar of pure destruction down toward the huddled troops. Vanson can only watch as the light engulfs their position. Vanson looks up at the approaching doom, her voice trembling as she whispers Packard's name. In her final moments, he's the only person she wants by her side. She wonders if they would have had any chance of surviving this day if he had been there to lead them. The regret is clear on her face as the light intensifies. The blast hits the center of the battlefield with the force of a falling star, lighting up the sky in a violent shade of purple. The impact is absolute. Mana surges outward from the point of impact, shattering the ground and sending shockwaves through the air. It looks like total annihilation for anyone caught in the center. The explosion creates a massive crater, throwing up a thick cloud of dust and debris that masks the survivors. The sound of the blast echoes across the mountains. Vanzin coughs as she tries to clear her vision, her expression one of utter disbelief. She's still alive, and the ground around her is untouched by the blast. She looks up through the settling dust, seeing a familiar figure standing right in front of her. He's back, and he hasn't changed a bit. A silver-armored hand grips the hilt of a glowing sword, as a massive shield remains planted firmly in the ground. The warrior declares that he's returned to fulfill his duty. Packard stands tall in his new runic armor, looking like an immovable wall against the enemy. He asks for his guild leader's orders, ready to dive back into the fray. Behind him, Yuta and Ash stand ready to join the fight. Vanzin can only stare, her mouth hanging open as she tries to process the fact that Packard is actually standing there. She stammers out his name, her eyes wide with shock. Packard glances back with a confident smirk, apologizing for being late. He figures she knows exactly why it took him some time to get here. Yuta steps forward, her large hammer resting comfortably on her shoulder. She tells the old man to save the greetings for later, pointing out that the battle isn't over yet. Packard agrees, his face setting into a determined look. He's not interested in catching up until the enemy is dealt with. He commands his team to move, heading straight toward the front lines. The soldiers behind them are revitalized by the sight of their returning captain. He charges into the horde of demons alone, looking like a silver streak against the gray sky. The monsters don't stand a chance as he nears their ranks. He leaps into the air and strikes the ground with his sword, creating a localized shockwave of red energy that sends demons flying in every direction. Yuta watches the chaos with a sharp grin, finally uttering the activation word for the blade's special function: convert. Packard's armor and sword suddenly flare with an intense blue light as the conversion process begins. Yuta notes that while the mana efficiency is terrible, a guy with Packard's massive reserves can afford the cost. Packard grips the new blade as mana begins to surge through its length. Yuta's voice explains that it will convert every drop of mana he pours into it directly into raw physical power. Enveloped in a fierce blue aura, Packard prepares to test the weapon. He can feel the immense power hum through his hands, realizing this is a true magic blade. Back on the front line, a soldier shouts with joy as she spots the familiar figure. The news of the Vanguard captain's return spreads through the ranks like a shockwave. The soldiers find a sudden burst of energy, dragging their fallen comrades back to their feet. Orders ring out to reform the lines now that their leader has returned to guide them. The blue-haired soldier stares in disbelief at the sudden turn of events. To her, this arrival in their darkest hour is nothing short of a miracle. A flaming projectile streaks through the sky, a deadly spear of fire aimed right at the heart of the guild's formation. The demon archer commander draws his bow, releasing a flaming arrow with enough force to whistle through the air. He's determined to end this resistance once and for all. Packard plants his shield firmly in the snow, bracing for the impact. The projectile hammers against his defense, but he doesn't budge an inch. The impact creates a violent explosion of heat and light, kicking up a thick wall of snow and steam. The ground shudders under the weight of the demonic power. Through the haze, the red demon stares down at the trio with a snarl. He admits he doesn't recognize these new players who have dared to interfere. Yuta leans on her hammer, casually asking if they've seen a kid with a weird staff around. Packard and Ash stand by her side, ready for the wave of enemies. The demon army roars as they surround the group. Despite the heroic return, the humans are still heavily outnumbered by the legion of demons. Packard narrows his eyes, focusing on the leaders of the enemy pack. He realizes they aren't dealing with common foot soldiers. These are actual commanders. Ash grips her weapon, her red eyes glowing with anticipation. She's not intimidated by the size of the demons or the weight of their titles. Packard gives the command, telling Yuta to focus on handling the archer while they manage the rest. He trusts his team to execute their plan perfectly. Ash leaps forward without a second's hesitation, her blade ready to strike. She tells the demons they get to play with her now, and she won't be going easy. She clashes with a winged demon in midair, their blades sparking as they trade blows. Her movements are quick and fluid, dodging his attacks with ease. Yuta joins the fight, swinging her massive hammer with a wild grin. She shouts that she's already marked her target, and there's no escape. The hammer begins to shift and click, the mechanical parts within it glowing with an intense red heat. It's ready for its next transformation. She calls out the command, multi-point lock-on, and several red energy beams shoot out from her weapon. They streak across the sky toward the demon archer commander. The demon just scoffs at the display, his red eyes glowing with pure contempt. He hasn't seen anything yet that truly worries him. He draws his bow once more, mocking the attack as primitive and futile. He's confident that no human tool can bridge the gap in their power. Packard charges through the snow, his shield raised as he closes the gap. He's focused on the demon archer, ignoring everything else around him. He activates the convert reverse function on his shield, causing the mana flow to shift. The shield begins to glow with an intense, concentrated energy. A massive explosion of fire and light erupts as his shield collides with the demon's projectile. The force of the impact shatters the ground beneath them. Ash uses the chaos as cover, dashing past the impact zone with her blade at the ready. She's moving too fast for the average demon to track. But before she could reach the demon commander, a two-horned guard blocked her path and swung his mace at her. She instantly activated the sword's gauntlet to block a flurry of wild swings, the two weapons clashing in a violent shower of sparks. He's surprised by the sheer strength behind her strike. The demon stares at her, his expression a mix of shock and irritation. He didn't expect this much resistance from a human girl. Ash just gives him a wide, cocky grin. She tells him she's sorry, but she was never the one he should have been worried about. She admits she was just the decoy meant to draw his attention away from the real threat. Her job is already done. While the demon was focused on Ash, Yuta drops down from above like a falling star. Her eyes are locked onto his position with predatory focus. She glows with a fierce golden light as she prepares to unleash her finishing move. She calls out the command, pinpoint lock-on. She unleashes a devastating beam of energy directly into the demon's face. The raw power of the blast is enough to blind anyone nearby. A massive explosion rocks the entire battlefield as the demon is engulfed in the blast. The force of it craters the earth and levels the surrounding area. As the smoke clears, Yuta stands with her hammer, giving the falling demon a middle finger. She proudly announces the move as the special-grade killer knuckleball. A chilling voice from the shadows notes that taking down a commander is quite an impressive feat. The victory celebration is cut short. Ash turns around, her expression hardening as she senses a new, much more dangerous presence. The air suddenly feels cold and heavy. From the darkness, a gloved hand appears, blood dripping from its fingers. The intent behind the movement is pure malice. The mage commander steps into the light, her hooded cloak billowing around her. She carries a gnarled staff topped with a glowing blue orb. Yuta's eyes widen as she feels the overwhelming weight of the newcomer's mana signature. This person is on a completely different level than anyone they've fought so far. The mage raises her staff, the orb pulsing with a mixture of blue and purple energy. She begins to cast a powerful spell, Invert the Crown. The Invert the Crown spell activates, engulfing the battlefield in a wave of distorted light. Yuta and Ash are caught in the center of the magical phenomenon. Ash, her ear tufts twitching in alarm, recognizes the inversion ability immediately. She shouts for Yuta to get down as the mana around them begins to fluctuate violently. A massive pillar of purple energy erupts with a thunderous roar, tearing through the snow-covered ground. The force of the explosion sends shockwaves rippling through the air. Ash grits her teeth in frustration. She realizes their previous attack wasn't enough to stop the mage commander's overwhelming power. Another blast of mana shatters the ground, creating a blinding flash of light and a cloud of debris. Vanzen Packard stands amidst the swirling smoke, his heavy armor gleaming. He calls out to Yuta and Ash, his face etched with concern at the speed and intensity of the enemy's assault. The mage commander speaks with an ominous calm, nodding that the duo countered her spell just in time. She admits their stats should be safe from the inversion for now. Hovering above the dust-covered field, the mage commander pointed her orb staff forward. She mockingly asked Packard if there were really only two of them left to finish this. She looks down with narrowed eyes, calling the Vanguard captain a constant thorn in her side. She expresses her frustration at his unwavering trust in worthless warriors. Mana swirls around Packard as he braces behind his shield. The mage commander mentions the permanent inversion spell she once placed on him, a curse intended to break him. A smirk spreads across the mage commander's face as she leans closer. She asks how he is even able to lift a shield again after what she did to him. Packard stares back with a hard, determined gaze. He recognizes her as a mage who once fought alongside humans on the front lines, and he vows to protect his allies even if he loses his limbs. Standing tall in his full plate armor, Packard faces the traitor with a heavy heart. He demands to know why a former hero would defect to the Demon King's army. The mage commander remains silent for a moment, her silhouette dark against the gray sky. She grips her gnarled staff tighter as the wind whips her cloak. Her expression turns cold and full of malice as she speaks. She declares that she despises warriors like Packard to her very core. She mocks the talk of honor and destiny as nonsense. She claims that while such warriors spout grand ideals, they are nowhere to be found when the situation truly becomes desperate. Packard listens as he grips his sword hilt, his hand clad in a heavy metal gauntlet. The air is thick with the mage's resentment. A flashback reveals the mage commander as a young woman, crying out in a dark, hostile forest. She was left for dead by her own side, deafened and unable to use one of her legs. In the distance, an honorable warrior carrying a shield runs away, abandoning her to the encroaching demon army. The betrayal is etched into her memory forever. Having survived the brush with death, she limps through the shadows, leaning on a rough branch. Her clothes are torn and bloodied, and her eyes are hollowed by grief. A close-up of her younger face shows the moment her hope died, replaced by a cold, burning hatred. In the middle of a dead clearing, she discovered the powerful staff with the blue orb. It was the catalyst that transformed her from a victim into a commander. Back in the present, she raises the artifact high, claiming the Demon King's army acknowledged her for this overwhelming power. She declares that she has finally found where she belongs, flanked by red-skinned demon warriors who she now calls her comrades. Packard looks down for a moment before meeting her eyes again. He simply acknowledges her words with a short, "Is that so?" He began his talk no jutsu on the mage, recounting his journey and nodding that many warriors on this front line had truly been pushed to the brink of insanity. Many warriors had fallen, their faces pale and streaked with blood. He represented the countless others who had given everything for an ideal they barely understood. Packard explains that these lunatics operate on the simple faith that their comrades will be there to save them. They charge forward on the blind hope that someone else will cut down the enemy before them. He looks out over the desolate battlefield, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dim light. Turning back with a sharp, defiant grin, Packard calls those warriors a special breed. He asserts that they are fools who throw their bodies on the line without a second's hesitation for each other. The mage commander scoffs, holding her staff aloft as blue flames erupt around the orb. She bitterly remarks that her leader clearly didn't consider her a comrade. She floats in a vortex of magical fire, her purple hair whipping around her face. She screams that the face of the vile warrior who abandoned her is all that comes to mind when she thinks of her past. Her eyes glow with a fierce, amber light as she makes a murderous vow. She promises to slaughter Packard and every single person cowering behind him. She spits out her final condemnation, branding all so-called adventurers as nothing but loathsome, hypocritical trash. It all started back in her village, when a sudden mana rampage leveled everything in sight. Bodies were scattered everywhere, and the young girl couldn't even tell if they were her parents or her friends. She just ran, leaving the ruins behind just to stay alive. Eventually, she managed to get her hands on a beginner's magic grimoire after sneaking into another village. It turned out she had a talent for magic that was far better than she'd ever expected. To keep herself fed and living, she joined the Adventurers Guild. The path of an adventurer eventually pulled her toward the most dangerous frontline on the continent. She stood on the edge of the world, watching the endless conflict unfold before her eyes. Every single day was a battle for survival against the remnants of the Demon King's army. It was a brutal life where seeing names crossed out in red on the guild roster was completely normal. Ironically, in a place where death was always looming, she finally felt like she found something. A comrade spotted her in the crowd and called her name Eugene. The veteran fighter joked that waiting around for death would only bring it faster. She found a group that treated her like one of their own, even letting her join in for drinks. She blushed and stammered as they teased her about her hidden drinking habits. The party was a weird mix, including a stingy monk and a dragon archer who'd cut his own horns off. There was an assassin who used dual swords, and a warrior who'd fled his homeland. And then there was her, the shady, illegal mage who had lost everything before joining them. Somehow, this group of outcasts ended up bonding in the middle of the war. She smiled, thinking that maybe this life wouldn't be so bad after all. They stood at the front, betting their lives on each other as the enemy closed in. When the battle got intense, They looked to her magic to turn the tide. She focused on her casting, while the others raised their shields to protect her. Her leader grinned, telling her to hit the enemy with everything she had. They unleashed their full firepower, a massive magical strike that lit up the battlefield. But things took a dark turn, and she ended up bloodied and broken on the ground. With a shattered leg and a hazy mind, she looked toward her party leader for help. He was screaming in agony, leaving her behind in her pain, unable to hear anything as the chaos reached a fever pitch. Instead of helping her, he turned his back and ran to save his own life. She reached out a trembling hand, crying and begging him not to leave her behind. He didn't look back once as he disappeared into the woods. Those memories of betrayal festered, turning her pain into a deep-seated thirst for vengeance. Back in the present, the mage commander, Inversion Mage, hovers in the air, magic shields circling her. Vanson Packard stands firm, his armor battered and his shield raised against her. Packard asks if she really thinks she's more than just a tool to the monsters she served. She scoffs, stating that monsters who never promised loyalty are better than humans who give hope just to snatch it away. A dark, clawed hand manifests as she channels her hatred into a final strike. Floating in a ring of ethereal blades, she declares she'd rather sell her soul than trust another human. A barrage of magic swords rains down, slamming repeatedly against Packard's runic shield. Packard grits his teeth, bracing himself as the relentless assault hammers his position. He remembers Yuta's warning back at the forge about the nature of her craftsmanship. Garantia Yuta had explained that her weapons require blood to truly activate. The mage commander, Inversion Mage, continues her assault, though the spectral, howling souls swirling around her suggest a heavy cost. Packard watches the dark energy flare, questioning if she's fueling her power with the very spirits she's absorbed. He catches a glimpse of her face through the shroud of her hood and realizes she isn't fighting for joy. Despite the devastating magic raining down, she looks like she's in agonizing pain. Packard reflects on his own path, knowing how easily he could have fallen into that same abyss. If he hadn't crossed paths with Garantia Yuta and her group, he likely would have ended up just as broken and filled with hate. Packard's thoughts drift back to the old days. He remembers sitting around a table with his former party, sharing bread and a good laugh. He still can't bring himself to hate Eugene because she was once part of that world just like him. In the present, Packard stands as a bloodied, iron wall in front of the fallen mage. He knows she was betrayed by the people she trusted most, so now he has to show her what real loyalty looks like. Not far off, Vanson leads the charge with her blue hair flowing. She screams for a monolock, ordering her party to form a magic barrage to help turn the tide. Packard's face is a mess of blood and dirt, but his eyes are fixed forward. He's convinced that as long as he stands at the front, his party will never abandon him and will fight by his side. He recalls the smiling faces of his old family, led by Boss. They were the ones who taught him the value of the bonds formed on the front lines, and those memories are still his greatest strength. A kaleidoscopic burst of magic slams into Packard's heavy shield. He holds firm as the impact creates a shockwave that rattles his entire frame. Eugene huddles behind her own magical barrier, her orb glowing with a desperate light. The incoming strikes shatter against the grid, showering her in sparks of mana. She looks up, her face a mask of shock and confusion. She can't wrap her head around why someone would risk everything to save her after what she's done. She hears a desperate cry calling her name and looks down with half-lidded eyes. The weight of the moment seems to be finally catching up to her. Vanson and the rest of the old crew come charging through the smoke, weapons drawn. Eugene is stunned that those idiots actually showed up to join this suicide mission. Her face is buried in the shadows of her hood as she grumbles about them being annoying until the very end. She's frustrated that their loyalty is making her feel something again. A massive magical explosion rips through the center of the battlefield. The sheer force of the blast sends debris and energy spiraling into the sky. Packard takes a heavy, grounded step forward, his boots crunching into the mud. He isn't done protecting her yet, not by a long shot. He towers over the kneeling mage, his armor battered but his resolve unbroken. She asks him if that shield of his is really meant for his former party or if he's just being stubborn. Eugene lets out a ragged, cynical chuckle as blood drips from her mouth. She tries to play it off, saying she only failed to block the attack because she's hitting her limit. Packard tries to reason with her, pleading for her to stop before it's too late. He knows there are still people waiting for her to come home, and he wants them to go back together. She gives him a weak, bloody smile that's full of bitterness. She's heard these heroic lines too many times before, and it's exactly why she hates adventurers so much. Looking at Packard, she sees the ghost of Boss standing right behind him. The way he carries himself reminds her way too much of that stubborn old man. She tells him to get lost and stop interfering with her fate. She doesn't want his pity, and she certainly doesn't want his help. Suddenly, a massive wave of fire roars toward them, turning the sky orange. The sheer heat of the blast promises to incinerate anything in its path. Packard reacts in an instant, swinging his massive shield up to intercept the inferno. The lion emblem on the metal glows as the flames wash over him. The fire hits the shield with a thunderous crack, sending a massive plume of smoke and embers into the air. It's a direct hit, but the shield holds firm. High above, the demon archer commander hovers on his wings, mocking the knight's stubbornness. He's surprised Packard still has the strength to keep that shield raised. The red demon smiles, a malicious glint in his eyes as he draws another flaming arrow. He thinks it's a shame that such effort is being wasted on a human like her. Packard glares at him through the blood and grime covering his face. He's battered, but he's still very much alive and standing his ground. He narrows his eyes in disgust, calling the demon out for using his own party member as a target. To a man of Packard's honor, it's the lowest thing someone could do. The demon archer commander just laughs at him, claiming that Eugene was never his ally in the first place. To him, humans are nothing more than playthings. He looks down at the mage with total contempt, calling her a broken toy he no longer needs. He's done with her and ready to move on to his next victim. Eugene yells at Packard again, telling him she never asked for his pointless pity. She just wants him to get out of her way so she can end this on her own terms. Packard doesn't move an inch, his broad back blocking her view of the demon. He tells her it's his choice to protect her, and he's not going anywhere. He looks over his shoulder with a fierce, blood-streaked grin. He believes that the moment someone stands behind his shield, they're his ally, no matter who they are. His hand tightens around the hilt of his sword, convert, as it starts to glow with a menacing red light. The runes on the blade hum with a power that feels dangerous. The toll of the battle finally hits him, and Packard drops to one knee. He uses the glowing sword as a crutch to keep himself from collapsing entirely. He admits he sounded cool for a second, but the truth is he's completely out of mana. He's running on pure willpower at this point. He looks at the weapon, nodding how it's a broken piece of gear that only gets stronger by draining his life force. It's a heavy price to pay for a bit of extra power. Eugene watches him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and worry. She warns him that if he keeps blocking everything blindly, he's going to die before he can save anyone. The demon archer commander pulls back a flaming arrow, ready to put an end to the night. He mocks Packard for being weak and useless compared to the power of the Empire. He's amused by the fact that Packard keeps dragging himself up, but he's finished playing games. He's ready to deliver the final strike. Just as the demon is about to fire, Yuta drops from the sky with her massive hammer. She tells him he's the one who isn't much use as a weapon. The demon's eyes bulge in shock as the giant hammer head swings toward his face. He didn't even hear her coming until it was too late. The hammer slams into him with a devastating impact, creating a massive explosion of dirt and energy. The entire area shakes from the force of the blow. Yuta stands in the middle of the carnage, a blood-stained, wild smile on her face. She promises to chew him up and crush him, just as she intended for her little convert to do. Ash stands tall among the debris, covered in blood but looking relatively unfazed. She comments that these frontline adventurers are on a completely different level compared to what she's used to back at the forge. She looks over at Packard with a smirk, her gray eyes glinting. She tells him that taking such pride in his work is actually pretty cool, giving the old knight a rare bit of praise. Yuta pipes up, telling Packard to lower his shield for a minute and catch his breath. She introduces them as the biggest troublemaker duo from Artisan Street, and they're finally here on the scene. Ash finishes the thought with a grin, calling their arrival a service call for the exhausted knight. She's battered and bruised, but her spirit is clearly as high as ever. Packard looks down at his boots, feeling a weight of guilt for not being able to do more. He asks Ash if she's okay and apologizes for being such a poor excuse for help during the fight. Ash just laughs it off, flashing him a sharp-toothed smile despite the grime on her face. She tells the old man to stop apologizing, admitting she was worried she'd die just from the sprint back to his side. A massive shockwave of energy ripples through the air as the focus shifts back to the wider battlefield. The dust begins to settle, but the tension in the air hasn't faded one bit. Packard stares into the distance, his expression going grim. He realizes that despite their best efforts to intercept the threat, they might have been just one step too late. Vanzin approaches, calling out to Packard as her guild master. She's impressed but slightly annoyed that someone else managed to beat them to the punch. She walks past him, giving him a nod of professional respect for managing to block an attack from a literal corps commander. Behind them, Eugene sits in the shadows of her hood, silent and defeated. Eugene looks down at her blood-stained hands, realizing that Yuta purposely stopped the fatal strike at the very last second. She wonders if their voices somehow managed to reach her even while the weapon's influence was consuming her mind. Yuta swings her hammer in a blur of motion, remembering the words of her father. He always told her that a weapon is a living thing that changes based on the wielder's own resolve and heart. Vanzin stands over the battered Packard, her spear in hand. He looks up at her, waiting for whatever command or reprimand she has for him after such a reckless stand. Packard stares off into the smoke, his face a mask of exhaustion and blood. He quietly admits that even after all his years of service, the reality of war is still absolutely terrifying. Eugene sits hunched over, refusing to look at her former party as they surround her. She tells them she's not going to make any excuses and they should just kill her and get the whole thing over with. The party's healer, a woman in white robes, shuts her down immediately with a sharp retort. She has no interest in her former comrade's self-pity and just wants her to be quiet. The healer starts her work, but not without mentioning that this treatment is going to cost a cool 200 gold coins. The swordsman of the group just sighs, realizing their reunion is immediately turning into a shakedown for cash. Eugene snarls, her teeth bared in a mix of rage and pain. She tells them to stop acting like they're still family, especially since their leader was the one who left her behind to die in the first place. The young swordsman looks at her with a heavy, sorrowful gaze. He reveals the truth she didn't know. Their leader never actually made it back from that mission. He explains that the leader stayed behind specifically to protect her while she was wounded, fighting off hundreds of demon troops alone. He died fulfilling his duty as the party's shield, ensuring she had a chance to escape. A memory of the leader, boss, surfaces as he runs headlong into the darkness with his shield raised. He didn't just see Eugene as a comrade. He valued her life more than he did his own. A foot steps firmly into the mud as the story of the leader's final stand continues. To him, the people in his party weren't just soldiers, they were his family. Boss is shown in a flurry of action, swinging his shield against a horde of demonic creatures. He fought like a man possessed, determined to hold them off for just a few more seconds. Despite being overwhelmed and bloodied, the leader never stopped swinging. He went out fighting to the very end, fueled by a single-minded goal to protect the person he left behind. In his final moments, the leader's resolve was absolute. He vowed to protect her no matter what the cost, even as the demons closed in from every side. Back in the present, the healer places a comforting hand on Eugene's shoulder. She tells her that the cursed weapon must have twisted her memories and clouded her mind, and she shouldn't let it win. Eugene begins to sob, the harsh walls she built around herself finally crumbling. The healer reminds her once again that they are a family, and that bond hasn't changed. A tattered photograph shows the original party in happier times, with Boss smiling broadly in the center. The caption simply welcomes Eugene back home to the group she thought had abandoned her. Yuta stands in the center of a pile of demon corpses, her hammer resting on her shoulder. She exhales a long breath, dismissing the entire horde as nothing but trash that needed to be cleaned up. She looks around the desolate battlefield, wondering why the Empire's army hasn't made a move yet. To her, it seems like they're content to just sit back and watch while everyone else does the hard work. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoes across the field, making Yuta snap her head toward the sound. The ground shakes with a power far greater than the demons she just finished off. A surviving demon commander is left speechless as he watches his entire force get wiped out in what seemed like a single strike. He can't believe the level of power he's witnessing. Taz the Thousand Slasher emerges from the smoke, holding a severed head as if it were a trophy. He's ecstatic to have found such a powerhouse of an opponent to wake him up from his boredom. With a slow, deliberate movement, the gray-skinned demon draws his massive sword. Lightning begins to crackle and dance along the length of the blade, illuminating the darkness. The demon introduces himself as a centurion of the Demon King's Third Corps. He carries himself with the arrogance of a seasoned warrior who has killed thousands. He admits it's been ages since anyone outside of the Imperial Army has even managed to catch his interest. To him, this fight is a rare delicacy he plans to savor. Taz lunges forward, a whirlwind of lightning and steel, telling everyone to get out of his way. He has no interest in fighting weaklings and is only focused on a true challenge. The Centurion calls out for a fair duel, wanting to cross blades with lives on the line. He's a combat maniac who only lives for the thrill of a life-or-death struggle. Yuta watches him with an expression of pure annoyance, not impressed by his dramatic entrance. She wonders aloud who this meathead even is and why he's bothering her. Her gaze shifts to Ash, who is covered in blood and has multiple arrows sticking out of her back. It's clear that her partner is already at her absolute limit and can't take much more. Yuta's hammer begins to glow with a series of red, pulsing veins of energy as she prepares for the next round. She grumbles about having to resort to this level of force just to finish the job. Exasperated, Yuta sighs and wishes she could just go back to her cozy forge. All she wanted was to get her stolen weapons back, and now she's stuck doing all this dirty work on the battlefield. Packard stands amidst the wreckage, his armor battered but his posture unyielding. As Yuta watches him, she thinks to herself that she still doesn't fully understand the hearts of those who risk everything to wield a weapon for the sake of others. Yuta winds up for a massive swing with her hammer, her face set in a grimace of effort. She questions the logic of people like Packard and Ash, wondering why they would put their very lives on the line for someone else's safety. Her hammer glows with a fierce red light as she brings it down through the air. She reflects that a blacksmith who fails to understand their wielder's heart can never hope to create a weapon that is truly a masterpiece. Sweat and blood streak Yuta's face as she commits to her attack with a roar. She shouts out a pinpoint lock-on move, admitting that while her technique is crude, it's the only way she knows how to fight. Taz the Thousand Slasher lets out a guttural scream, his eyes blazing with a crimson light. His face is a mask of fury, even as blood spills from the wounds he's already sustained. The demon centurion swings his lightning-wrapped blade in a desperate arc. But before he could pull off anything major, Yuta swung her hammer, unleashing a magical blast that pierced straight through the monster's body. Yuta is hunched over on the ground, her breathing heavy and ragged. She mutters a curse under her breath, feeling the searing pain of her injuries but refusing to let it stop her completely. Taz looks down at his chest, his expression one of pure shock as blood sprays from a devastating wound. He can hardly believe that his pride and skill weren't enough to secure his victory. Yuta kneels on the dark, blood-soaked ground, her hand resting on the hilt of her hammer. As she stares at the weapon, she notices something she hadn't seen before, her eyes widening in realization. A close-up reveals a distinct blacksmith's crest engraved on the hammer's handle. Taz recognizes the mark immediately, his thoughts flashing back to a legendary figure from the Demon King's own history. The crest belongs to the human blacksmith who was once forced to forge the most powerful weapons for the demon armies. Taz realizes the weight of the legacy Yuta is carrying into battle. An image of a red-haired woman surrounded by flames appears in his mind, the slave witch who danced with fire in the demon forges. Taz lets out a manic laugh, finding it a twisted irony that her daughter has now turned her skills against the very army she once served. Yuta looks on with a grim smile, her face half hidden by her messy red hair. Taz comments on the twisted twist of fate that brought the witch's descendant to defect to the human realm. The demon centurion's mouth is a bloody mess, yet he continues to grin with malicious intent. He declares that Yuta's little escape and defiance will end right here on this battlefield. In a horrific display of willpower, Taz's body continues to move even after his head has been partially severed. He raises his sword high once more, mockingly calling Yuta a witch who lowered her guard too soon. Yuta's golden eyes are wide with shock as she stares up at the headless juggernaut before her. She realizes with a sinking feeling that she's completely exhausted and can't even find the strength to move out of the way. A hand grips the pommel of a sword with white-knuckled intensity. A voice declares that they will stake everything they have left on one final, desperate strike to end the battle. Lightning arcs violently around Taz's headless form as he prepares for a final suicide attack. He boasts that his body is still fueled by the sheer will of a warrior who has taken 1,000 lives. Packard looks on in horror, his face pale and covered in blood. He understands that the coming attack is unavoidable and that there's no way he can dodge or block a strike of that magnitude in his current state. A hand reaches out to grasp a glowing staff, ready to intercede. The atmosphere crackles with magical energy as the final pieces of the confrontation fall into place. Eugene, the mage commander, stands from her defeated position, her hooded cloak billowing in the wind. She holds her blue orb staff aloft, preparing for one last act. With tears streaming down her face and blood at the corner of her mouth, Eugene whispers a single command: "Teleport." She has made her choice to protect those who were once her family. Her former party members watch in stunned silence as Eugene vanishes in a burst of blue light. They cry out her name in a panic, realizing too late what she intends to do. Eugene reappears directly in the path of the devastating attack, her purple hair flying behind her. She looks at her friends one last time, her expression filled with a mixture of sadness and quiet resolve. Yuta turns her head, her eyes wide with shock as she sees Eugene standing before her. She can't believe that the maid she was just fighting is now sacrificing herself to save them. Eugene's staff glows with a blinding, ethereal light as she begins to chant a forbidden spell. She offers her own blood and soul, telling the magic to take everything she has left. A massive sphere of blue energy erupts around Eugene, drowning out everything else in its wake. The power of the spell is so great that it seems to bend the very light of the battlefield. Standing within the center of the magical storm, Eugene prays that her aimless rage has finally been accepted. She calls out to invert the crown, a final transformation of her power. A close-up of Eugene's eye shows a look of intense focus and strain as she pushes her magic beyond its breaking point. She whispers the word overload, triggering the final release of energy. Eugene is completely enveloped in a pillar of purple and blue light, her body starting to fracture under the sheer pressure. She begs for help in completing this final act of atonement for her past failures. The blue orb at the top of her staff begins to spiderweb with cracks, unable to contain the massive amount of energy being channeled through it. The sound of the glass shattering echoes across the silent field. The swordsman from her old party reaches out a hand, his face contorted in a scream of grief. He begs Eugene not to go through with it, but his words are lost in the roaring light. Eugene's face appears calm and serene amidst the fading light of the explosion. She thinks to herself that she is finally at peace, her burdens lifted, and her debts paid in full. The massive explosion leaves a colossal crater in the ground, smoke rising from the charred earth. Yuta is seen as a small, lonely silhouette in the distance, the only survivor left in the immediate vicinity. A set of lone footprints lead away into a vast, white expanse of nothingness. The scene is quiet and still, a stark contrast to the violence and noise of the battle that preceded it. Eugene walks through the white void, her head bowed and her long purple hair flowing around her. She reflects on her life, thinking that even her final journey is destined to be a lonely one. She stops and looks down at her hands, a sad expression on her face. She tells herself that this isolation is simply her karma for all the things she's done. Suddenly, a voice calls out to her, calling her a shady mage, in a tone that is both familiar and teasing. Eugene looks up, her eyes wide with surprise as she realizes she's not as alone as she thought. Boss is sitting on a rock nearby, a kind smile on his face as he laughs at her. He tells her that she's arrived way too early and should have stayed in the living world for a while longer. Eugene begins to cry, but this time they are tears of relief and joy. She asks Boss if they had all been waiting for her this whole time. Boss stands up and gives her a playful heave-ho as he prepares to welcome her. Boss puts a hand on his hip and asks her who else would protect a weakling like her if the demon forces showed up on the road to the afterlife. Eugene immediately gets defensive, shouting that she's actually gotten way stronger. Boss lets out a hearty laugh, his goatee shaking as he puts an arm around Eugene's shoulder. He teases her that if she's really that strong, they must have waited for nothing, nodding that she's still as prickly as ever. Eugene looks down, her purple hair partially veiling her face as she makes a quiet confession. She tells Boss that she has committed many sins during her time as the mage commander. Boss listens with a gentle, knowing smile, his eyes closed in a peaceful expression. He tells her that acknowledging her past is enough, accepting her without judgment. Boss continues to comfort her, pointing out that he has saved far more people than she has ever killed. He offers to help her carry the burden of her atonement, suggesting they stick together from now on. His face splits into a broad, joyful grin as he admits how much he missed his little shady mage. The warmth in his voice fills the white void surrounding them. A small, sincere smile touches Eugene's lips as she accepts his invitation. She quietly agrees, finding the peace she had been searching for. The two figures walk away into the brilliant light, their shadows stretching out behind them. Boss jokingly asks if she can finally hold her liquor, prompting an indignant shout from Eugene as they bicker like old friends. Back on the battlefield, the silence is heavy amidst the scattered debris and blood-stained snow. The shattered remains of Eugene's staff lie in the mud, a silent testament to her final sacrifice. A gloved hand reaches down through the carnage, moving toward the broken blue shards of the orb. The atmosphere is somber, filled with the lingering weight of the conflict. Yuta stands tall, her face and clothes smeared with blood and grime. She holds a piece of the broken staff, her expression one of weary contemplation as she surveys the aftermath. Behind her, Packard sits on the cold ground, his head bowed and his body battered from the fight. The landscape around them is a desolate stretch of smoke and ruins. The ground is littered with broken pieces of golden armor, half buried in the blood-soaked earth. It is a grim reminder of the high price paid for their narrow victory. In a memory or a fading vision, Eugene stands amidst the carnage, her eyes closed in a final moment of rest. Packard reflects on the choice the mage made to stand against her own kind to protect them. A wide shot shows the bleak gray sky over the mountain pass, where a single gnarled tree stands as a lonely sentinel. Packard thinks to herself that she respects the conviction it took to make such a sacrifice. Ash stares off into the distance, her face marked with blood and her expression unreadable. Small horns are visible peeking through her messy brown hair as she catches her breath. Yuta sits beside Ash, looking down at the shattered fragments of the staff in her hands. She remarks that it will take forever to fix something this broken, her voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Looking over at her companion, Yuta sighs and mutters that things like justice and convictions are far too complicated for her to fully grasp. She seems weighed down by the moral ambiguity of their survival. Ash keeps her back to Yuta, looking out over the field of dead soldiers. She admits that she has no idea what justice is either, and that she's simply trying to follow in the footsteps of the person who meant everything to her. A vision of a scorched battlefield under a blood-red sky appears, depicting a time when the Empire had abandoned its people. The scene is one of absolute annihilation, where hope seemed entirely lost. In the memory, a young Ash sits on the ground, her hood torn and her face hollow with trauma as she looks up from the sea of corpses. She recalls the person who saved her life without asking for anything in return. A blonde woman in shining armor stands before her, a brilliant sun-like glow behind her. She smiles broadly, welcoming the young girl and telling her that the horns on her head are actually quite cool. Ash closes her eyes, a rare, genuine smile crossing her face as she remembers that moment. She says simply that her only real goal is to become like the hero who saved her. Yuta lets out a long, weary breath, her eyes closed as she sits in the cold air. She admits that living up to such an ideal is incredibly hard, feeling the physical and emotional toll of the day. The two women sit together as tiny specks amidst a vast landscape of death and tattered banners. As the dust settles over the battlefield, the question of what true justice really means hangs heavy in the air. Welcome to the industrial heart of Artisans Street, where smoke stacks and gears define the skyline. Yuta leads the way, glancing back to ask Vanzen Packard if he's really okay with walking away from his old hero party for this life. Vanzen Packard doesn't hesitate for a second, giving her a simple, confident smirk that says it's fine. He remembers the look on Vanzen's face when he told the crew he was leaving. They really thought he was back on the team for good. But he had to be honest with them. In his current state, he can't even lift a shield, and he's not interested in being a burden. He's decided to dedicate himself to assisting Yuta, aiming to forge a weapon that actually fits his style instead of relying on junk. He pounded his chest and made a solemn promise. He'll return to his rightful place once he's truly ready. Vanzen just gave him a soft smile, promising that the rest of the party will be waiting for him whenever that day comes. It was a clean break, and the night felt lighter than he had in years as he turned his back on the battlefield. He knows it's just not the right time to be a hero yet, so for now, he's focused on the path ahead. Yuta officially welcomes the old man to the gritty, soot-covered streets she calls home. They arrive at the Half-Love Forge, Yuta's place of apprenticeship, while Ash chimes in that someone has to keep a lid on Yuta's chaotic energy. Vanzen Packard looks around the shop, noticing a distinct lack of the unique monster weapons Yuta is known for. Ash quickly explains the local rules. Monster gear is strictly taboo on Artisans Street, so they have to keep it on the down low. Yuta is just hyped to be back, ready to stop talking and start making some noise with her hammer. But her excitement dies instantly when she sees a box of her personal tools packed up and sitting right in the middle of the room. She looks up to see Baron Brooke on the balcony and tries to introduce her new friend. But the old master isn't in a social mood. He cuts her off mid-sentence with a single, cold command for her to leave the premises. He walks down the stairs and delivers the blow directly. He's officially kicking Yuta out of the Half-Love Forge. Ash and Vanzen Packard are stunned, thinking there must be some kind of misunderstanding or a bad joke going on. Baron Brooke doesn't care if they want an explanation. As the owner, he's well within his rights to toss an apprentice whenever he feels like it. He doubles down on the insult, calling Yuta a ticking time bomb that he's no longer willing to have under his roof. Yuta's temper flares, suspecting that the Council of Elders is the real reason for this sudden betrayal and offering to go set them straight. Baron Brook tells her the Council has nothing to do with it and warns her to pack her bags before he's forced to throw her out personally. Yuta stands there with her back to him, the weight of the rejection finally starting to sink into her shoulders. She admits she never expected the man she called Master to give up on her and her work so easily. She turns on her heel with a bitter grin, sarcastically thanking him for the hospitality before walking away for good. She storms out the door without looking back, leaving a worried Ash and Vanson Packard to trail behind her. Once the door shuts, Baron Brook's tough act starts to crumble, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow as the silence of the shop takes over. He grips his pipe tight, his hands trembling slightly now that the woman he was trying to protect is gone. He stares out into the street, trying to convince himself that breaking her heart like this was the only way to save her. He knows the Council has his shop under their thumb, and staying would only hinder Yuta's growth while the Empire makes its move. If those Imperial agents found out a survivor of the Vulcania massacre was hiding here, she'd be dragged right back to a living hell. He realizes that more and more people will soon be hunting her for the terrifying power of her monster weapons. But seeing Vanson Packard and Ash by her side gives him a small peace of mind. She finally has people who will fight to protect her. He reaches out to touch the wall, a silent prayer that she manages to survive and truly find her wings out there. He picks up her apprentice tag one last time, accepting that his role in her story is officially over. Out in the street, Ash breaks the silence, asking what the plan is now that they've been tossed out. Yuta just scratches her head, reminding herself that while the forge is gone, she still has her contract to hunt down her missing weapons. Garantia Yuta couldn't have imagined that power could be this terrifying. She compared the bureaucrats to monsters, nodding that they were even more fearsome. She slumps down on the street, venting her frustration about being kicked out of the guild. Without a forge to take them in, they can't even begin to craft the new gear they desperately need. Vanson Packard just watches her with a knowing, humble smile. He's seen enough war to recognize that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Without a word, he drops a heavy leather pouch right at her feet. The weight of it hitting the ground sends up a small puff of dust, immediately catching Yuta's attention. Packard sits down across from them and offers a simple solution. If no one will give them a forge, they should just buy one for themselves. He gestures toward the pouch like it's no big deal. Ash peeks inside the pouch and is nearly blinded by the contents. It's packed to the brim with glittering gold coins, more than she's seen in a long time. Packard explains that this is the price of blood from the front lines. It's the collective reward from all the soldiers whose lives were saved by their intervention. He insists that Ash and Yuta take it without hesitation. For him, the gold is a small price to pay for being able to protect his family and his comrades. Yuta can barely find her voice, looking up at the veteran with wide, stunned eyes. The sudden windfall is almost too much for her to process. Packard's grin widens, clearly pleased to be able to help the two women who changed his fate on the battlefield. He tells them that this is only the beginning of their journey. He truly believes that their skills will bring hope to countless others, just as they did for him. Yuta's massive mechanical hammer hangs at her side, reflecting the sunlight. It's a reminder of the raw potential she possesses, now backed by the funds to actually use it. Ash is genuinely touched, her eyes welling up as she looks at the old man's kindness. But in the background, Yuta is already plotting, her hands clasped together in a fit of greedy giggles. The gravity of the moment is completely lost on Yuta as she starts celebrating. Her gratitude has already morphed into pure, unadulterated excitement for the spending spree ahead. She's gone full manic, her eyes literally turning into gold coins as she laughs. She demands a promise that there are no take-backs now that the money has changed hands. Ash's emotional moment is ruined instantly, and she snaps at her partner to act like a normal person for once. They waste no time heading straight to the Artisan Street Real Estate Agency to scout for their new headquarters. Yuta stands tall with her arms crossed, arrogantly demanding the deed to the most expensive land in the entire district. She's ready to build the forge of her dreams, regardless of the cost. Ash follows behind, looking completely drained by Yuta's sudden ego trip. She reminds the girl that it wasn't even her money to begin with. As the group walks away, a hand with a red glowing gauntlet appears in the foreground. Someone has been watching them, and they've definitely noticed the heavy pouch on Yuta's belt. A hooded figure lurks in the shadows of an alleyway, a sinister, toothy grin visible beneath the cowl. The red gem on the gauntlet pulses with a predatory light. Yuta pauses, sensing a shift in the air, and starts to look back over her shoulder. Something is very wrong. The red gauntlet erupts with energy, the light intensifying until it's almost blinding. It's an activation speed that shouldn't be possible without a massive mana draw. A sudden, violent flash of red light consumes everything. Yuta is caught in the shockwave, her feet slipping out from under her as she's thrown back. Ash grinds her teeth, shielding her eyes from the intense glare. Even with her legendary reflexes, she can't quite track what just happened in that split second. Yuta groans and sits up, her head spinning from the sudden burst of light. She's disoriented and wondering what hit her. She reaches for her belt and her blood turns to ice. The money pouch is gone. Only a faint white outline remains where the heavy bag used to hang. Yuta stares blankly at the ground, her dream of owning the best forge on the street shattering in an instant. She looks like she's about to have a total breakdown. In the distance, the hooded thief sprints through the back streets with impossible speed. The flash was so fast it even bypassed Ash's combat instincts. The thief looks back with a single glowing red eye visible. They know exactly what they've stolen, and they have the monster weapon to make a clean getaway. Packard actually starts laughing, finding the sheer chaos of traveling with Yuta entertaining. He remarks that there's never a boring moment when she's around. Ash is not amused, staring at him with a deadpan expression. Packard notes that if the thief tries to spend that much money in this district, they'll be found immediately. Yuta slumps onto the pavement, completely defeated. She knows that pickpockets aren't stupid enough to spend the gold where they stole it. Ash turns to her, asking if the local thieves fall under the jurisdiction of the guilds or the underworld. She's already thinking about how to track them. Yuta immediately changes her tune, pressing her hands together in a desperate plea for Ash to help her get the money back. She's practically begging at this point. Ash sighs, accepting that she's going to have to clean up this mess. She turns her back and starts heading toward the seedier parts of the city. She tells them they're going to the back alleys, the part of Artisan Street that most people pretend doesn't exist. Her expression is cold and focused. The group descends into a world of discarded iron and rusted buildings. This is the industrial underbelly where the real deals are made, far from the glittering storefronts above. They stop in front of a heavy wooden door with a crude sign hanging above it, Pawn Shop, Blyet. It's exactly the kind of place Ash would know about. Ash doesn't bother being polite, slamming her fist into the wood with a loud bang. She demands that they open up before she decides to just kick the whole thing down. A heavy metal sliding window clacks open from the inside, revealing nothing but darkness at first. The shopkeeper is clearly cautious about their late-night visitors. A single sharp eye peers through the narrow slot, sizing them up. A voice from the shadows asks a simple, dangerous question, friend or foe. Ash tells the person behind the slot to quit acting tough and open the door before she breaks it down herself. She's not in the mood for games. The single eye stares back with pure irritation, as the person inside wonders why these troublemakers had to show up tonight. With a heavy thud and a long, metallic screech, the door finally swings open. The shopkeeper realizes they can't just ignore someone like Ash. Ash leads the way into the darkness, mumbling about returning to her past and the memories she left behind in this place. The group descends a flight of stones, stares into the heart of the shop, their footsteps echoing in the cramped, grimy space. Packard's instincts immediately scream at him, as he feels a wave of intense bloodlust coming from the shadows where multiple eyes are watching them. A sharp, mocking voice cuts through the tension, greeting the crazy bastards, as if they were just stray cats dragged in off the street. They find the shop owner, *Lazala*, a woman with a cyan bob cut and a gold monocle, reclining in a chair with a smirk. She runs Pawn Shop Blyet with a cynical, sharp tongue. Lazala doesn't even stand up, asking why Ash had to crawl back to the alleys and if she missed the mercenary life that much. Ash keeps it cold, calling her Big Sis, but telling her to skip the pleasantries so they can get down to business. Lazala's face twists in annoyance as she admits that Ash still has that same irritating, arrogant expression even after all this time. She snaps at her subordinates, telling the idiots to scram before she has to clean up their bodies for disrespecting their senior. Several armed men in the shadows back off reluctantly, their silhouettes etched against a deep red light as they realize who they're facing. Packard looks completely out of his element, sweating a bit as he tries to process that Ash is considered a senior in a place like this. Garantia Yuta just grins proudly, explaining that Ash used to be a legendary big shot in these alleys before she became their guard. Ash stays focused, ignoring the praise and telling Lazala that they're only here because they need specific information about a thief. She explains that their money vanished in a bright flash right topside, and they suspect a specialized thief is using a monster weapon. Ash doesn't mince words, threatening to turn the whole shop upside down if Lazala is still using kids for pickpocketing. Lazala leans back dismissively, telling them to stop accusing innocent people and that she'd love an introduction to anyone with that kind of skill. Her tone shifts as she reveals that the same Flash bastard has actually been making things difficult for her own operations lately. She admits she has a good guess who's behind it, but warns them that the thief has a weapon so crazy that even her group can't make a careless move. Ash doesn't care about the danger, demanding Lazala spit it out so they can handle the situation themselves. Lazala's face twists into a wicked grin as she flips a coin, excited to see the cyan-horned golden eye back in action. She's got nothing to lose. She points them toward a hideout on the outskirts of the district, run by a gang she calls a bunch of snot-nosed brats. The group arrives at a grimy, reinforced building covered in heavy chains and a faded sign that identifies the gang as the Jackals. Packard wants to assess the perimeter, but Yuta is already fuming, deciding she'll ask politely in her own way. Vanzen Packard is surprised by her supposed tactical approach, but Yuta just scoffs, believing that words should always come before violence. That belief lasts about half a second before she kicks the door off its hinges, screaming for them to give her money back. Yuta stands in the doorway with a terrifyingly cheerful grin, threatening to beat them half to death if they're fast, or all the way if they're slow. Inside the hideout, several rough-looking men stop and stare in disbelief at the small redhead who just barged in. Yuta's smile turns dangerous when no one answers immediately, and she asks if they seriously want to die that badly. One of the thugs stands up, gripping his axe and telling them that since they found their secret base, they can't be allowed to leave. Yuta just laughs at the stupidity of their choice, swinging her massive hammer in a wide, menacing arc. She notes that even the stray mutts in the back alleys know better than to mess with someone like her. Ash finally draws her flaming sword with a sharp ring, giving the gang one final chance to hand over what they stole. The leader of the thugs turns pale as he gets a good look at her, the name Ash finally registering in his mind. A vision of Ash's bloody legend flashes through the room, the mercenary standing atop a mountain of corpses with a scythe and sword. Panic spreads through the gang as they realize they're facing the human butcher herself, and they wonder how a retired legend found them. Yuta teases her partner, calling her quite the celebrity, while Ash just smirks at the familiar fear she inspires. Yuta gets back to business, resting her glowing hammer on her shoulder and telling them to hand over the money before things get messy. Despite the odds, one of the thugs tries to rally his men, brandishing a spear and declaring that their only choice is to fight. The room crackles with energy as Packard, Ash, and Yuta all prepare their weapons to wipe out the gang in one go. This is easier for them anyway. Yuta leads the charge into the Jackal's hideout, her staff spinning as she clears a path through the entrance. Ash and Packard follow close behind, their weapons ready. A panicked guard screams for his comrades to hold the line. He knows they can't let these monsters reach the inner room. Ash's eyes burn with a predatory red light as she sizes up the opposition. She realizes they must be guarding something important in the back room. With a powerful swing of her flaming blade, Ash sends a shockwave of fire and wind tearing through the hallway. The guard is paralyzed by fear as the wall of flames approaches. He screams one last desperate order to stop her. Yuta appears behind him with a mocking grin, her eyes scanning the room. She's only interested in finding where her stolen money is hidden. Packard joins the fray, unleashing a crackling bolt of blue lightning that sends a thug crashing to the floor in agony. The hideout descends into chaos as the trio carves through the defenders. The Jackal's members realize they are completely outmatched. They reach a set of heavy wooden doors at the end of the corridor, the last line of defense for the gang. Ash doesn't hesitate, letting out a sharp command to clear the path as she prepares to breach the inner sanctum. Yuta is the first to burst through the doors, her face set in a greedy grin as she expects to see a mountain of gold. Her expression instantly falters, replaced by genuine shock at the sight waiting for her inside. Instead of a treasure vault, the room is filled with frightened children huddled together in the shadows. Yuta can barely believe her eyes. A young man with a scarred face steps in front of the kids, his hands raised in a desperate plea for mercy. Ash takes a seat on a nearby crate, her intimidating aura still heavy in the air. She demands an explanation for why these children are living in a hole like this. The young man, Kemper, trembles as he looks at the legendary mercenary. He knows that one wrong word could mean their end. He begins to tell a grim story of an empire consumed by war and pillaging, leaving the borderlands in ruins. Countless children were left orphaned and homeless, forced to flee to the back alleys of the city to survive. Without identities or a future, These teenagers had no choice but to turn to crime just to put food in their mouths. Emperor explains that they formed the Jackals as a brotherhood to protect the kids who had nowhere else to go. Ash listens in silence, her brow furrowed. Emperor admits they were born in the gutter and expected to die there. But as their numbers grew, the other powerful factions in the underworld began to see them as a threat to their territory. He recounts the tragic day. Their previous boss was killed during a brutal turf war with a rival gang. They only survived when their current leader, a woman with long pink hair, managed to obtain a powerful magic gauntlet. Yuta isn't moved by the sob story, stretching her arms and demanding to know where her money went. To Yuta's horror, Ash suddenly announces that they will help the Jackals. Yuta can't believe her partner is being so soft-hearted. Ash points a finger at the kids, telling Yuta that coming from the dark doesn't mean they are doomed to stay there forever. Yuta looks at her partner, wondering if Ash is trying to make up for her own dark past as a mercenary. Suddenly, a girl with glasses and messy brown hair bursts into the room, gasping for breath. Yuta immediately corners her, asking if she knows where the stolen money is hidden. The girl is too panicked to respond. Emperor tells the girl to calm down and show respect to their guests, introducing the legendary Ash and Big Sis, Yuta. The girl ignores the introductions, screaming that their boss has walked right into a deadly trap set by the other gangs. She explains that the leader went out alone to settle a dispute and is now surrounded by enemies on all sides. Emperor is struck with panic, realizing they don't have the strength to rescue her on their own. Ash stands up, her decision already made. She repeats that they will help save the Jackal's leader, but she makes Emperor swear a solemn oath that they will abandon their life of crime once this is over. Emperor doesn't hesitate, bowing his head to the floor and swearing to give up the dirty work forever if his boss is saved. Satisfied, Ash tells him to lead the way. It's time for them to go get their money and settle some scores. The unlikely alliance marches out of the hideout, the trio's presence giving the young gang members a newfound sense of hope. Across the district, the Jackal's boss Asterisk finds herself cornered as a massive thug leaps through the air toward her. The large gang leader Asterisk's right arm is encased in a glowing red gauntlet that crackles with dangerous electricity. He brings his massive axe down with a roar, the sheer power of the blow promising to crush anything in its path. The large gang leader lunges at the Jackal's boss, but she manages to deflect his axe with her dagger at the last second. Red sparks fly as her smaller weapon scrapes against his massive blade. In a blur of motion, the Jackal's boss ducks and rolls under the leader's strike, slashing her dagger across his abdomen. She curses the rival bosses for hiding behind their lackeys while she takes the brunt of the fighting. The large gang leader stumbles backward, the impact of the Jackal's boss's quick counterattack causing him to lose his footing. Dust kicks up around his boots as he tries to steady himself. Blood splatters across the ground as the Jackal's boss follows up her initial strike with another swift cut. She stands over her opponent, her face spattered with blood and her breathing heavy. The Jackal's boss gasps for air, her body trembling from the exertion. She stands firm, declaring that she won't let these bastards touch the children protected by her gang. Across the courtyard, a group of rival gang leaders from Artisan Street watches the battle with detached amusement. The alliance of human traffickers and drug dealers is impressed by her tenacity, but knows she's reaching her end. The large gang leader laughs, clutching his wounded side as he mocks her flimsy sword skills. He towers over the exhausted woman, telling her it's a miracle she's lasted this long. With a sudden burst of speed, the large gang leader delivers a powerful kick that sends the Jackal's boss flying across the pavement. She crashes into the stones, her armor clattering against the ground. One of the rival leaders, a man with a prosthetic golden hand and a scar over his eye, steps forward through the smoke. He expresses his disappointment that an orphan who survived the Empire could be this pathetic. He demands she hand over the magic gauntlet she's holding, offering to spare her life in exchange. The Jackal's boss remains slumped on the ground, unable to move. The rival leaders share a sinister laugh as they plan to sell the Jackal's orphans into slavery for a high price. They have no intention of letting anyone live. The large gang leader picks up a heavy sack of gold, marveling at the fortune someone on Artisan Street managed to hoard. He ignores the bleeding woman at his feet. The Jackal's boss closes her eyes, her thoughts drifting to the children. She knows that if she fails here, they will all be doomed to a life of misery and slavery. The other gang leaders discuss how they will split the spoils once the rest of the Jackals are wiped out. They are eager to get their hands on the powerful magic weapon she carries. In her fatting consciousness, the Jackal's boss wonders if dreaming of a normal life was always this impossible. Her face is pale and streaked with dirt and blood. She recalls a memory of a cruel man looming over a group of orphans, ordering them to go out and steal money. This was the only life she and the others had ever known. Even in the top side of the city, they were never welcome. A blacksmith throws a bucket of water at a young version of the Jackal's boss, telling the back-alley criminal to get lost. She felt like an outcast who belonged nowhere, just an overgrown kid struggling to survive in a world that hated her. Her mind turns to the previous leader of the Jackals, a man who gave them a sense of belonging and a shared dream of a better future. She wonders why he had to leave them behind. Memories of her comrades laughing and sharing a meal flash through her mind. For a brief moment, they had finally found a place they could call home. The large gang leader prepares a final, magic-infused strike to end her life. He decides that since she's gone quiet, he might as well finish the job and take the weapon. The Jackal's boss looks down at her blood-stained hands, her fingers trembling as she realizes she has reached her absolute limit. She can no longer fight back against the overwhelming odds. The large gang leader winds up a massive punch, his arm glowing with a violent purple aura. He looks down at his target with a cruel grin, telling the little girl to say her prayers. A brutal impact sends a spray of blood across the air as the strike connects with a sickening force. It looks like the end for the Jackal's boss as she takes the full brunt of the power. Ash steps into the light, her flaming sword crackling as she stares down the leader. She asks what kind of boss gives up so easily, clearly unimpressed by the display. The Jackal's boss stares back, her face battered and streaked with dirt from the fight. She's completely stunned, barely able to process who just stepped in to save her life. Ash glances over her shoulder, noting that the woman has already lost a significant amount of blood. She's not just here for the rescue. She's assessing the damage with a mercenary's eye. Reaching out, Ash grabs the mechanical gauntlet strapped to the boss's arm. She tells her flat out that she doesn't even know how to wield the weapon properly. Ash stands tall, adjusting her grip as she refocuses on their real objective. They need to find their stolen gold, and she's ready to make whoever took it pay dearly. The team is fully assembled. Packard with a mana orb, Ash with her glowing gauntlet, and Yuta resting her massive hammer on her shoulder. They're looking for their money, and they plan to collect it with interest. Emperor and the other orphans watch from the sidelines, hope starting to flicker in their eyes for the first time. They can't believe someone is actually standing up for them against the gangs. The trio dives head first into the crowd of thugs, becoming a blur of red, blue, and steel. It's an absolute massacre as they tear through the rival gang members with ease. Emperor lets out a small laugh, seeing the overwhelming power on display. He realizes these newcomers aren't just random travelers. They're clearly there, seniors in every sense of the word. One of the gang members, a rough-looking guy with an eye patch, swings a heavy spiked club. He mocks them, thinking 3 people couldn't possibly take on their entire group at once. Packard effortlessly sidesteps a lethal strike, his expression completely bored. He tells the thug that his sword technique is beyond pathetic before preparing his own counterattack. Blue energy swirls around Packard's hand as he prepares a spell he calls Magic Missile. Though it sounds basic, there's nothing simple about the sheer mana he's channeling. A massive wave of blue energy erupts from Packard, blowing a whole squad of thugs backward. The force of the impact leaves the street cratered and the enemies scattered like leaves. Ash sticks the landing with a heavy thud, her feet kicking up a cloud of dust. She's moving with such speed that the eye can barely keep track of her position. Leaping high into the air, Ash's red gauntlet crackles with intense lightning. She tells the thugs it's finally time to pay back that interest she promised earlier. A gang member tries to raise his sword in defense, but he's visibly confused. He doesn't see a weapon in her hands and wonders what on earth she's even swinging at him. Ash slams her hand forward, activating the gauntlet's true power. Snatch it! Shock! Red lightning bolts leap from her fingers, striking every weapon in the immediate vicinity. In a split second, the thug's sword vanishes right out of his trembling hands. He's left staring at his empty palms, completely defenseless and utterly shocked. He looks up, sweating as he realizes the situation has turned deadly for him. Ash is right there, hovering over him with a terrifyingly calm and focused expression. Every stolen blade and axe is suspended in the air around Ash, held fast by webs of red lightning. She's turned their own arsenal against them in a matter of seconds. With a sharp movement, she sends all the weapons slamming into the ground around her. She lands in the center of the iron forest, looking like a goddess of war. Ash gives them a shark-like grin, her eyes glowing with a predatory yellow light. She points out that since there are plenty of weapons lying around, she might as well use them. She becomes a whirlwind of violence, grabbing weapons as she moves and carving through the gang. No one can touch her as she strikes with lethal, practiced precision. The Jackal's boss watches from the ground, her jaw dropped in absolute disbelief. She can't even track Ash's movements. It's like watching a powerhouse she never knew existed. Ash stands over her fallen enemies, looking completely at home in the middle of the carnage. The boss wonders if this is what it really looks like to master the true power of a weapon. One of the thugs recognizes Ash's unique horn and the golden glow of her eyes. He pales instantly, gasping out that they're facing the legendary, cyan-horned golden eye. A panicked thug tries to back away from Yuta, shouting about a truce they're supposed to have between gangs. He's desperately hoping the local rules will save his life. Yuta doesn't give a damn about any truce or underworld rules. She grips her glowing red hammer, her face twisted in rage as she promises to kill anyone who touched her money. She smashes her hammer down, unleashing a devastating explosion of white light and force. The thugs scream in terror, trying to shift the blame onto the brats who actually stole the gold. A pair of mages scramble to get away from the blast radius as the ground shatters. They're terrified, realizing they've picked a fight with a group of genuine monsters. Emperor watches the destruction with wide eyes, sweat beads rolling down his face in the heat of the blast. The sheer scale of the power Yuta is throwing around is beyond anything he's seen. Ash charges forward again, her voice full of genuine disgust for the gang. She can't stand people who use children for their own gain, forcing them to bloody their hands. She thinks of the way these monsters brainwash kids, making them believe they can never escape the filth of the back alleys. To her, people who work children to the bone are the absolute worst. The Jackal's boss sinks to her knees, overcome with emotion as she hears Ash's words. It's a harsh reminder that these kids don't belong in the dark, filthy world they've been forced into. Packard and Yuta look on as the dust starts to settle in front of a shop called Half Love. The battle is reaching its conclusion as the trio stands victorious. Ash swings her sword, a massive crescent of flame trailing behind it and lighting up the alley. She calls out for her 1,000 hands, technique to put an end to the fight. The boss looks toward the sky, remembering the person who led the Jackals before her. She can almost hear his voice reminding her that they always have a choice. A memory of a man in a green cape flashes through her mind, standing tall in the sunlight. He once asked if it was truly okay for people like them to hold onto their dreams. Emperor stands beside the current boss, watching the three heroes as they walk through the aftermath. Looking at Ash, he's hit by a sudden wave of nostalgia for the past. Emperor smiles, seeing a familiar spark of kindness and strength in Ash's eyes. He tells his big sis that Ash gives him the exact same feeling he had when he first met their old boss. Emperor recalls the day their hideout was raided. The previous boss had appeared out of nowhere, smashing everything in his path, yet rather than being angry about what was stolen from him, he chose to understand the reality of their situation. The man had stood there with a confident smile, arms crossed over his chest. He laughed and declared that from that moment on, they were all his little brothers, and that they would go and find their dreams together. Emperor looks back on that memory, a slight smile on his face despite the current chaos. He notes how strange it is that even though that boss is long gone, he can still see his spirit clearly in the actions of others. He wonders aloud if they can ever truly live as freely as their former leader once did. Standing behind the powerful figures of Yuta and Ash, the possibility of a different life starts to feel real for the first time. The Jackal's boss stands with her back turned, her head bowed as she reflects on the sacrifice that brought them here. She knows the previous boss died specifically to protect the dreams of everyone in the group. Turning around, her face is stained with blood and dirt, but her expression is resolute. She apologizes to her siblings, admitting that she took the very ones he wanted to protect and led them down a dark, dangerous path. The orphans gather around their big sis, their eyes full of loyalty despite the wounds they've all suffered. They look out at the ruined city around them, ready for whatever comes next. The boss slams her fist into the ground, a loud thud echoing through the alleyway. She declares that from this moment on, things are going to change for all of them. She drops to one knee, her cape fluttering behind her as she centers herself. She vows that they will protect their new path and the people standing right in front of them. With tears welling in her eyes, she promises to lay down her very life to protect her family. To her, protecting their dreams is more important than any treasure or gold pouch they could ever steal. Another memory of the old boss flashes by, his warm smile a sharp contrast to the grit of the present. He seems to be apologizing for leaving everything on their shoulders and for failing to protect them when it mattered most. The jackals stand together as a united front, their resolve hardened by the battle they just survived. They look toward the horizon, ready to move forward and finally chase the dreams their old boss believed in.